The February 19th meeting of the Town Council and Parking Authority. Are we still called that? That's what we used to say. All right, just the Town Council then. Can we have the roll call, please?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Styock.
Here.
Councilmember Spector.
Here.
Councilmember Rennie.
Here.
Vice Mayor Jensen.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Leonardis.
Here. I have two volunteers this evening that will be leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'd like to call them forward. It is Sue and Bob Buxton, and when they arrive, I will say a few words about them. Come on up. It is a pleasure to have you both here this evening. Great volunteers for our town. They've been in the town for 44 years, raised their family here, and I will read some of the volunteer activities that Sue and Bob have participated in on behalf of the town of Los Gatos and other organizations throughout the years. It began, the Home and School Club at the schools, the Dad's Club, Parcel Tax Elections, the Elementary Educational Foundation, Art Docents of Los Gatos, a place for teens, and the High School Career Center. Once the boys went to college, Sue went to work for the town of Los Gatos as a volunteer services coordinator, and Bob worked to pay for the tuitions. When they did retire, I guess that means the college bills were all concluded. Bob served 2 years on the civil grand jury for the county of Santa Clara, and he is currently the chair of the Transportation and Parking Commission. And Sue is active in the Assistance League of Los Gatos, Saratoga, and she serves the town of Los Gatos on the library board, as well as volunteering for the Friends of the Library. And together, they both volunteer for Canine Companions for Independence. They both value their community service and feel that it not only enhances the community, but has enhanced their lives. So, a shining example. How about a big round of applause for Bob and Sue Buxton, Sue and Bob Buxton.
Thank you. It's quite an honor. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It's a pleasure to have you coming here tonight.
It's an honor.
Thank you. It really is.
Let's go down and say
Shining stars. You're welcome. One for each kid.
Thanks, Steve.
How about another round of applause for Sue and Bob Buxton? Also like to remind those who are watching and those in the audience, there are many volunteer opportunities to serve on boards and commissions in the town of Los Gatos. So you can go on our main webpage and apply for future openings. We have a presentation for the Happy Dragon, but they are not here tonight, so we will be giving this. Are they here? Oh, great. Please come forward to the podium. Thank you.
Jane Fazzari.
Jane Fazzari, thank you for coming in. So what can I say about the Happy Dragon? It is a wonderful store that supports a wonderful cause, supported by wonderful volunteers. It is a great part of our business community. It adds to the unique character of our business community in Los Gatos. And I am just proud. I've been going in there for a long time. They have great bargains. And there's so many good, you reuse things. It's like recycling, right? It offers great values, and it gives everybody in there smiles all the time. So if you haven't been to the Happy Dragon, go pay them a visit. We're proud to have them in Los Gatos. And I would like to have Jane say a few words. I could read a commendation, but that'll put you all to sleep. But hopefully they will put this on their wall signed by all 5 council members. Jane, would you like to share a few words about your organization with us?
Well, thank you very much. I've been volunteering for 10 years. We are 100% volunteers, and it's just a wonderful organization for Uplift Family Services, which originally started out as the Ming Kwang Home back in, I believe, the early 50s, or maybe even before that. I know the Happy Dragon has been there since 1958, and it's just a great organization. I enjoy it very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for your continued dedication to a great cause, being part of our business community. Picture? You want a picture? Would you like a picture?
I think someone took a
Here.
picture.
We could do one.
Oh,
Do
okay.
you have it already? Okay.
Great. Sure.
Next on our agenda is our consent calendar, and we have one item, number 7, that has been requested to be pulled by members of the audience. Does any member of council wish to pull an item from our consent calendar? Seeing none, can we have a motion? Vice Mayor?
I move approval of the consent calendar consisting of items 1 through 10 with the exclusion of 7.
Right, we have a motion and a second. And Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. And I will be supporting the motion with the exception of agenda item 5, where I will be voting no.
All right. So I will call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously, making the notation Councilmember Spector voted no on item number 5. Moving on to our verbal communications. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on any item which is not on the agenda this evening? We have 4 cards so far. First is Catherine Summers.
Good evening, Council. 3 points that I wanted to make tonight, but first I wanted to thank some of the Chamber's friends for being here. I think a lot of them want to get to the beer portion of tonight, but 3 points that I did want to make tonight, though. One, I wanted to thank you for your support and for staff help with the formation of the PBID. We're getting a lot of positive feedback about the idea, and I think that sustainable source of income for the downtown is essential as we evolve into these next few years. Brayton, our president, is going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. With regards to summer programming, I wanted to make sure that at that last meeting when we had the priority setting, that you had coupled an amount of money to us that both the PBID money and the summer programming was one and the same. And I just wanted to make sure that we separate those two out. And you had given some money for the PBID and some for the summer programming. So with regards to the summer programming, after more research and a lot of discussion, the Chamber has decided that we will build upon our block party idea. We've identified 3 Thursday evenings in the summer where we will host parties in the town plaza. Unlike last year, however, we plan to do it between 5 and 7 p.m. At 7, people will be hungry, so we hope that then they will go out to our restaurants and wander down the street. We are also working with one of our big food and wine supporters, Loma Brewing, and they are also taking this block party to one step further. They hope to actually close Gray's Lane for a good portion of the summer and have programs for all ages, families and adults, or older people. One of the great ideas that came forth was an open call for artists, street performers, and musicians to come into town every Friday night. I think we have a lot of time to actually make that happen, and I think if you could just imagine Los Gatos with music and art and street performers, I think we actually really might bring people here. It's all about making Los Gatos a destination, which brings me to my last point. And sorry, Mayor, but I'm going to run with your idea. That bucket with $1 million to spend on making Los Gatos the best town in Northern California. Even if we pass the PBID, we will not see any of those dollars for at least 12 to 18 months, and we need a shot in the arm today. You all know that Bare Naked Ladies song, I'm sure. If I had $1 million, I would be rich. Although in Silicon Valley that might not be the case, but what would I do with that $1 million? I think we can really start with this Million Ideas campaign, which I started today actually at a luncheon. The ideas are simple. They're not tackling traffic and parking and some of the things we hear all the time, but instead they're really about beautification of downtown. I have a list of the ideas that I collected today, just today, and I'm hoping for about 990,000 more, but we'll never get there, I know, but a lot of the ideas are the same, and they're street pole banners and clean sidewalks and everything that you hear time and time again, and I think it's your council, it's your day, and I think we should go for it.
Thank you, Ms. Summers. Next speaker is Brayton Gosling.
Good evening. My name's Brayton, and I just wanted to touch base with you guys. I know on our last priority setting meeting, Catherine explained in some detail about the BAD. Since then, we've met several times with our steering committee for it, as well as Civitas is the program who is actually going to be looking at doing it. We're absolutely really grateful that the town had committed support to this, and so far had said it would be about $15,000 that they're willing to commit. We would like to apologize and do state that we were not quite prepared at that time to make the actual specific financial ask. We were had a little misunderstanding on what we were really presenting that night, and thought we were just educating and not prepared to say the amount that we need. So we've really kind of broken the program down into two parts. Phase one is really the data gathering, the outreach, the property owner meetings. That's going to be the raw data that the town would then get back and be able to have to know a little bit more about the actual property owners here in town and what their desires are. With that being said, that first part of it that we are hoping to get done and knocked out is actually an amount of $22,000. So that's what the chamber is asking at this time, to have a consideration of $22,000 instead of the $15,000 that the town had previously said they might be willing to commit to. And that's where we're at.
All right. Thank you. We have a question for you. Mr. Rennie?
My question is, so is this a first of requests, or the only request is that chamber going to run with
Sure, and that's
raising money afterwards?
So that what we're looking to do is look to raise the money afterwards. We're hoping that this can be the town's commitment on it.
Kind of a seed.
Yes, if you will.
Thank you.
Of course.
Councilmember Sayoc.
Mr. Brayton, what percentage is the 22,000 of the total?
The entire project is about 65.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Our next speaker, Alan Feinberg.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. My name is Alan Feinberg. I live at 363 Pennsylvania Avenue. My wife Joan and I have been Los Gatos residents now for 30 years, and we just love our adopted hometown. And that's why I'm here tonight, to urge council to invest in rejuvenating our downtown. As Catherine mentioned, there's lots of work that needs to be done, from scrubbing our sidewalks to improving our crosswalks. And I'm sure you'll hear some great ideas out of that list of 1,000 or so. But since most of you know me from the Discover Los Gatos historical walking tours, I'll stick with my area of expertise, and specifically how we can leverage our town's listing in the National Register of Historic Places. Now, that's a big deal, folks, and it gives us a specific competitive advantage that Campbell doesn't have, Saratoga doesn't have, and they sure don't have it in Santana Row. When it comes to attracting visitors, I hope you'll help the council to fund a destination marketing campaign. I hope the chamber, rather, to fund a destination marketing campaign to promote that unique distinction in print media as well as in social media outlets. As part of that, there are 20 landmark properties in our town which I think deserve to be recognized with historical markers. And while we're at it, we should also restore the historical plaques that were embedded in the Town Plaza sidewalk some 20 years ago, and they've since become almost illegible. Now, I know this is an area of some controversy, but I believe that we can resurrect the abandoned Forbes Mill Annex once and for all and reopen it as a tasting room for some of the small local wineries up in the mountains. Now, imagine going wine tasting in a 150-year-old landmark stone grist mill that's filled with historic artifacts from the town of Los Gatos. Funding could also restore John Bean's spray pump. It's been rotting away in storage, and the new museums don't have the funding to restore and display it. Let's exhibit it prominently to celebrate our town's history of Silicon Valley-style entrepreneurship. Finally, we could define our landmark district with a gateway arch across North Santa Cruz Avenue, welcoming visitors to historic downtown Los Gatos. Now, all of this can't be done overnight, so in addition to asking for an investment in downtown rejuvenation now, I urge council to also approve seed funding for the PBID, the Business Improvement District, that the Chamber is working on, and this will enable the town to secure ongoing funding for downtown projects like these and many more.
All right.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Feinberg. Okay, our next speaker, Jack Von Nader.
Good evening, Jack Van Nader. Last year, we lost one member of the Finance Committee. That was Stanford professor Ashby Monk, Executive and Research Director of the Global Research Department. Ashby was one of the people you're looking for. He's 40 years old. He'd replace somebody like me. One reason we lost Ashby was because we couldn't get the meeting schedule, so his travel conflicted with our meetings. On December 10th, we had the last Finance Committee meeting. The Finance Committee meetings, I believe, are to be every 2 months, which would make February the 10th the next meeting. To my knowledge, on our website, which, by the way, needs a lobotomy, you cannot find any meetings scheduled for the Finance Committee. Now, it may be there, but you can't put in your normal search terms and find the meeting. My concern is you've got two excellent people left, and we'll lose them if we can't get, if you can't get your act together and get the meeting scheduled. Thank you.
All right, that concludes our verbal communications. We'll move on to our first public hearing this evening, and that is the application for a conditional use permit, U18020, the property location, 114 South Santa Cruz Avenue. And this is concerning an approval for a restaurant with beer and wine service, otherwise known as Hopa's Brewing Company. We have Ms. Jocelyn Schupman, our planning liaison on this project. Take it away.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Before you tonight is a request for a conditional use permit to allow for a restaurant with beer and wine service by the applicant, Hopa's Brewing Company. The applicant is proposing to operate a restaurant with rotating beers, wine, and food service. Their proposal includes interior renovations to the existing building, as well as modifying the existing parking lot to accommodate a new outdoor seating area. There are no exterior modifications or increases to the existing floor area that would occur as a result. The Planning Commission considered the request on January 9th of this year and forwarded a recommendation of approval to the council with 2 modified conditions. One, to limit music to non-amplified, and the other to prohibit the use of televisions or speakers on the outdoor patio. A desk item report has been distributed to the council this evening, which includes public comments received after the distribution of the staff report. This concludes staff's presentation, but we are available along with the Economic Vitality Manager to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Schupman. And we have the Vice Mayor first.
2 questions. Thank you for your report. I just wanted to put on the record that the Planning Commission recommendation for approval was unanimous, correct?
That's correct.
And Mr. Rennie is sort of voting to me off to the side. One person was absent, but those that were there voted for it, correct?
That's correct.
The added condition of the no amplified music out on the patio, that goes above and beyond the town's entertainment policy, does it not?
It does.
And you didn't mention it, but the building is in the C2 district, so it complies with the zoning, correct?
Yes, it does. The use does.
And the parking is adequate under the town regulations?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Rennie?
Thank you, Mayor. I want to understand the outdoor area more. I've heard different numbers. It's supposed to be able to seat 49 people. Is that correct? And is this an area where people can be standing? And is there, since it's an outdoor location, is there a fire code limit to how many people can be standing in this area?
So the town code doesn't have a limit for the number of people in the outdoor patio. That's regulated by the fire code. And if you look at the fire code occupancy, I believe it permits up to 66 people outdoors.
And can they, and that's assuming they stay inside sort of this plantered area inside where the bullions are and everything. What's to keep them from spilling sort of further outside of that?
So the applicants proposed some barriers to that outdoor seating area. So they have tall planters to try and separate the outdoor seating from the parking lot, since there are parking spaces that abut up to that area. But that area would account for those 66 just in the outdoor. It wouldn't account for those inside the building.
One more question. Was there any discussion of sound deadening kinds of things being added? When I go out and look at the space, it's all hard concrete, hard asphalt. The sound's going to bounce all over the place. There's nothing there to absorb sound. And even the wall to the 2 nearest residential properties is, I can almost see over it. I mean, I guess I could jump and see over it. Was there any addition to that wall also?
The applicant's not proposing any changes to the existing wall, but the council could consider additional landscaping or additional fencing that would address some of those noise concerns.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions from council? Seeing none at this time, we will ask the applicant to come forward and share with us your business proposal.
Good evening. Thank you to the council members for hearing us tonight. By way of introduction, my name is Brian Edwards. I am one of the owners and the head brewer at Hoppus Brewing Company. I have with me my other 2 partners, Derek Tam and Peter Burrell. We are Los Gatos natives, at least Derek and I are. Peter is from Saratoga. We don't hold that against him. So I wanted to start with how we got here, how we decided on Los Gatos and specifically this location. Derek and I are childhood friends. We grew up playing Little League together and stayed friends all the way through college. And when we moved back, we started homebrewing together in my mom's kitchen and started forming this idea for Hoppus Brewing Company. And as we got better at it and our hobby became a passion that became a business idea, we started looking and trying to figure out where we wanted to open this business. And of course, Los Gatos was the top of our list, being our hometown, being a place that we thought a brewery would thrive. We weren't able to find a location. Back then, this is in 2012-ish. There's just a confluence of events, including our regular jobs, prevented us from starting. So we ended up shifting our focus to San Jose, where we were able to find our current location. When we have sense of building this successful business in San Jose, we decided to grow our business by opening a second location and wanted to revisit Los Gatos. We did some research. We looked at several locations, but for a number of reasons, price, size, location, the fact that this space has utilities brought in, it was recently renovated, our landlord was willing to work with us. We wanted to have outdoor seating as well. This space ticked all the boxes. So once we found this space, we decided to move forward and have gone through the Planning Commission as previously mentioned, and we're passed unanimously. But I did want to talk about why we thought we're good for Los Gatos and the community, and hopefully it helps sway your minds in our favor. The first is we have a history of contributing to our community in San Jose in our current location, but also Los Gatos as well. We've participated in LGAA events, Lions Club. I poured at an event for my alma mater, Van Meter. We sponsor local softball teams, and we've done the event previously mentioned for the Chamber of Commerce. We're also a job creator. Many of our employees at our current location are Los Gatos residents, and they make a really good wage working in our tap room, and that would continue obviously in Los Gatos. But beyond that, our general contractor is founded by Los Gatans, and some of our subcontractors, or even in the audience, are residents of the town. Our commercial real estate agent is even a Los Gatos native. We're a taxpayer, obviously, and I feel that we would be a good addition to downtown. We feel a need. We're a family-friendly, dog-friendly location where you can come and enjoy a beer. Which segues into something else I want to talk about, is who we are not. And I want to just clarify this because I think there's some misconceptions about what we're trying to do here. We are not a bar. We do not serve anything except for the beer we make with a couple wines for non-beer drinkers. We do no hard alcohol. We're not going to be open late per bars that stay open until 2 p.m. We're not going to play loud music. We're a place to come together casually to have a beer, to have conversation, family-friendly, like I mentioned. This is not a place to come and party and get drunk, stay out late. It's really a place to come play games, grab a beer before music in the park, somewhere to walk to after a farmer's market on a Sunday. We've done a bunch of outreach. We knew there was going to be some concerns from the neighbors being so close to the toll house. We're well aware of the trials and tribulations that went into that conditional use permit. So we reached out to the neighbors prior to our Planning Commission meeting. We did hear from some of them. We did garner some early support, which has seemed to peter out a bit. But we did get a unanimous approval from the Planning Commission. So going into this meeting today, we reached out to the neighbors again and scheduled an informal conversation with them. We had a good turnout. The goal was to introduce ourselves, talk about our concept, and hopefully help assuage some of their fears. It was a good meeting. We were able to meet with them, and we were able to get a good grasp of the concerns of the neighbors, all of which are warranted. So I wanted to talk about those a little bit and what we plan on doing to help calm some of those fears. First of all, as it relates to noise, which seems to be one of the top issues on everyone's mind, we are very familiar with the town's late-night entertainment policy as well as the noise ordinance. We are happy to abide by that. And we are working with, this was just mentioned, with a landscape architect as well as our architect on some ideas for what we can do to help with some of the noise to that adjacent home. So we've already had some ideas with some landscaping stuff that we might be able to do relatively easily. Parking, I know is another issue. We've run the numbers. It is a shared parking lot. There are signs. We're happy to update the signs if necessary so that customers are aware of where they can and cannot park. But the calculations were run, and they do abide by the town's code. Traffic was also mentioned as an issue, and knowing where we are on South Santa Cruz right before the freeway entrance, it does get backed up. But this space is, going to be used for something. someone's going to move in if it's us, if it's someone else. So traffic is whoever is there is going to contribute to traffic one way or the other. Our beer garden, it is contained by the planter boxes as previously mentioned. So we are going to make sure, keep eyes on our customers and making sure they're not drinking alcohol outside of the limits of our beer garden. That would put us in violation of our alcohol permit, and we would risk revocation of that. We're non-smoking, so neighbors wouldn't have to worry about smoke drifting into their yards. And all of our bartenders are trained on how to prevent customers from being overserved, so we don't have drunk people wandering out and causing a disturbance in the neighborhood. I just wanted to summarize by saying what we're really looking for here is an opportunity to abide by the town's rules that are laid out in the code. We've done everything that we can to best follow those rules, the noise ordinance, parking, occupancy, all of our updates to the building that we have drawn out are all to code. So I just want to really emphasize that we empathize with the neighbors. We understand their concerns. We want to be a good neighbor. We love this town. It is our hometown. And we are going to do everything in our power to make sure that we are a positive contribution to the downtown area. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. We have a question for you from the Vice Mayor.
A couple, if I might. How long have you been in your Willow Glen, San Jose location?
We'll be celebrating 2 years on Saturday.
And during that time, have you ever had any police complaints, noise complaints, or any other kind of complaint about your operation from neighbors or the greater community?
We have not had any complaints as far as noise, and we are in a relatively new part of town as far as development goes, so there are a number of apartment buildings on all sides of us, and many of them are some of our best customers.
I actually visited your business in San Jose in preparation for the meeting tonight, and I noticed that there's kind of a big balcony, deck kind of walkway in front and around to the side, which is accessed when you go through the building. There were people out on the deck, even though it was freezing cold. It was real, but there were not anybody out in the front deck, and I'm wondering if you patrol that in the same way that you're indicating you would do it in Los Gatos.
We don't patrol that. It might have been a factor of the fact that it was cold and there aren't any tables out there. People don't tend to go out that way unless they're leaving the building.
I also noticed that, at least when I was there were a number of birthday parties
Yes.
for, I'm going to say, like 3-year-olds.
Yeah.
So, and I also noticed a lot of dogs. Is that something that you do frequently or offer the space for that?
We do, yes, we do that a lot. We have inquiries for private events all the time. We have one almost every single day. And it's funny, a lot of them are for stuff like first birthdays, or we do a lot of baby showers, stuff like that are family and kid friendly.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Rennie?
Thank you, Mayor. Let me go back to the question I'd asked staff. Do you, at your current place, or do you foresee it occurring here, a lot of people standing around so that you get a large number of people all starting to talk and get loud out in the outdoor area, or will they mostly be sitting?
I would imagine they'd mostly be sitting. We have 5 tables outside currently, so there is ample seating. Rarely does it get crowded enough that there aren't seats, so most people do sit, and I would imagine that would be similar in Los Gatos. We don't foresee it being quite as busy in Los Gatos as our Willow Glen location.
Do you have happy hour specials where the beer is really cheap and people drink a lot of it?
We do not.
And can you tell me more about, if I could keep going, Mayor, the game play area, what occurs in that area?
So currently we do have an area in the back that people play cornhole. It's a beanbag game, and I believe that is in our drawings as well. And I know that there was some concern specifically about that. We are not married to that at all. I think it was, I actually don't, you can ask our architect. I'm not exactly sure. It's just a suggestion for something that we might be able to do outside. But if that's something that's frowned upon, we would certainly not do that.
Well, what I'm trying to figure out, it sort of surprised me that you've designed it with your game area closest to the residential neighbors versus flipping it. And I don't know what's going to generate more noise, people playing cornhole or several tables of people talking.
Right.
But, you know, I would flip it if you thought game playing would make more noise.
Sure.
And you have game playing at your current
We do, but the area that abuts it with our neighbor, it's a bus depot, so no one really complains about noise.
And one last thing on you said you would be willing to put fencing or other plant type of things to deaden on the residential side, but I think, are you also willing, and I think it's probably necessary, on the opposite side where the toll house wall is, that's a big brick wall that all the sound's going to bounce off and go and probably actually travel further unless you can get something deadening on that wall.
Makes sense, yeah. We would be open to that as well. Definitely.
Okay, I think that's all my questions for now. Thanks.
Okay. I'm going to go to Councilmember Sayoc and then.
Okay, thanks. So at the Planning Commission hearing, there was a lot of discussion about hours and trying to have it similar to the surrounding areas. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I recall that they agreed on a 9 p.m. And or was it just discussion among different council members?
It was just discussion among the planning commissioners of adjacent businesses and their hours of operation.
Okay. So then the question for your Willow Glen, understanding that what you ask for isn't necessarily what you always will work up to, what are the hours of operation at your Willow Glen property?
So at Willow Glen, we're closed on Mondays. We're 4 to 9 p.m. on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 3 to 9 on Friday, 11 to 9 on Saturday, and noon to 7 on Sunday.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question, if I may, Mr. Mayor, with the noise, I know that's been an area of concern, and with the Toll House, there were a lot of sound studies that were done. And so I'm curious to know if you and your partners have done any such studies in between the Planning Commission and these hearings, and at the community meeting, were you able to do any informal recordings with devices people have?
We have not done any formal sound study. It was discussed at our community meeting. I know there's some neighbors who have apps on their phones that can measure sound, which we took those out and we're trying to figure out sound. So we understand that the noise ordinance it allows for a certain decibel level that is not very loud. But I think if we are able to put in some sound deadening landscaping, that'll help a lot. Because we were inside in an empty building where it's really echoey when we were playing around with that app. So it was hard to get a good read on it, but we did not go outside to the property lines and measure sound levels at that meeting.
Okay, and if I may, a third question. So watching the Planning Commission tapes, there was a discussion about how vital the outdoor seating was to your business, and my understanding is it is. Without doing a sound study, how do you know that you won't violate it, therefore then somehow impact your business model for future use?
That is definitely a concern of ours. If we talked about our options after meeting with the neighbors, and one of the options that scared us was if our CUP is approved and we are not able to control the noise levels, what do we do? And it's something that we're just going to have to be hyper aware of, and hopefully we're able to do some creative stuff as far as landscaping or architecturally with walls or what have you to really help keep that noise down. But we'll be vigilant. We'll make sure our staff knows the levels to maintain and do the best that we can.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Edwards, I need to, hello.
Hi.
I need to get some clarification between the Planning Commission and when you sent in an additional letter to the council. Now, the Planning Commission had some concerns, but because there was no acoustic music, they were okay. But then in your letter, you have on your paragraph number two, we would like the option to have outdoor speakers for music. That to me seems inconsistent with what the Planning Commission was saying, but why don't you explain to me why it is or is not from your point of view?
Sure. So after we went through the planning commission. We talked about it internally amongst myself and Derek. And just in thinking about that outdoor space, what it would be like with and without music, it just seemed to make more sense to have music. I mean, like I mentioned before, we don't want to be playing loud music. We want people to sit down, enjoy a beer, talk about it, talk about whatever is going on with their lives. It's a place to come to interact with other people and not go deaf because the music's so loud. So really what we are thinking is just to have speakers, the option to play background music, not very loudly so that people can still talk, but just so that there's something to fill the void so there's not weird, awkward silences.
But wouldn't speakers be amplified? I mean, I'm not an engineer, but am I missing something here?
No, that is amplified, and we know that was against what the Planning Commission recommended, but we felt at a low level, the speakers would not contribute too much noise and just add to the experience. I mean, on the other hand, we are allowed to have acoustic music. If we have some friends who play guitar or whatever, they can come sing. It would certainly not be any louder than what we would be doing in that instance.
You said you are allowed to have music.
That's my understanding.
You're looking
Unamplified
around, is
music?
it discussion with staff or with people in the community?
I'm sorry?
You have this understanding because of...
After our meeting with the Planning Commission. That was my understanding, was unamplified music, acoustic-only music would be permitted.
Okay, but not amplified.
But not amplified.
But aren't you talking about amplified?
Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if I imagine a guy playing an acoustic guitar on our patio, the music that we would play, if we didn't have someone on an acoustic guitar, would be no louder than what was happening when someone was playing live.
Right. Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
A couple, if I might, just follow up on that. Yes, the Planning Commission did impose a condition that there's no amplified music outside. Now, one could think of amplified music as AC/DC with, amps and a guitar, or one can think of an acoustic guitar that has a mic in it so I can actually hear the guitar,
Right.
which would be not amplified the way I think the Planning Commission was discussing it. Is that your understanding of the type of amplification you would use?
That is correct. And I know that we talked specifically about speakers outside to play background music. And that is what my letter was addressing, was after further reflection, we felt that would be a nice ambiance to the outdoor space, was to have those speakers.
And in any event, you're prepared to follow the noise ordinances and be available to neighbors for any kind of complaints, et cetera, that they may have
That's
regarding
correct.
noise?
Mhm.
Okay. And if we were to impose a condition like that, that would not be a problem?
Just that we are
Just
available.
to say you're available.
That would not be a problem.
Okay. Then I just wanted to follow up on the games. In your San Jose location, you have an indoor space that's dedicated, sort of like a bocce ball court at Campo de Bocce, that's cornhole, if I'm going to describe it in a way
Wednesday.
that people might be familiar with.
Yeah.
But there aren't any of the cornhole games outside, et cetera, at that location. But there are only, a couple or three inside, I think it is?
We do have an informal league that our Willow Glen residents who come on Wednesdays and use our private party area for cornhole. We do have one set of house boards that we do set up on the back patio that people utilize. I mean, when the weather's nicer, it's been a while, but that's not necessarily something that we would do. I highly doubt that we would do that in Los Gatos.
In addition to the cornhole game, I noticed that in the San Jose location, there were a bunch of board games, both for adults and kids. There was Scrabble, Connect Four, there was little flip games for kids, et cetera. Would you anticipate having those kinds of games available in Los Gatos?
I would think so. People seem to really enjoy them. They're fun for everyone of all ages. So I would imagine that we would do something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rennie?
Thank you. One more question. So I think you were applying for staying open till 11 o'clock, and I assume that means that you were planning to have music till 11. Currently in town, we we have by right till 10 o'clock. If we said your music has to stop at 10 o'clock, would that hurt your business very much? It seems to me you got an hour to wind
Would be-
down and,
We would have planned on doing that anyways per noise ordinance.
okay, thank you.
All right, seeing no further questions for you at this time, we will start to call the public forward. If you'd like to speak on this item, please fill out a card. And our first speaker is Sue Barden.
Good evening. I just want to thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity to speak. This is my husband, Ben, and we've been residents of the town of Los Gatos for 34 years. Known Derek for over 30 years and known Brian for many years too. And just want to say these are men of great character and tremendous integrity. Just wanted to let you know that we've been to the Hoppers in Willow Glen on many occasions, and I think this is exactly what the town of Los Gatos needs and wants. A place to gather casually where people can get together and be part of community. I think it's really important that we all feel a sense of community, and I want to let you know that the Hoppers in Willow Glen is exactly what this lends to. People can come, enjoy each other, enjoy conversation, have a great beer, and just get together. So I just want to say that my husband and I and our friends are very, very supportive and really hope that the town of Los Gatos approves this project.
Right.
As far as I'm concerned, I reiterate what Sue said. We've known Derek and Brian for years. They've played football here in Los Gatos. They understand the culture here and people and the town. I think they're going to respect, being here, and they're going to value, the opportunity to have a business here and certainly abide by the rules. So,
thank you.
Don't think it'll be a problem.
Right, thank you very much. Brett Moore.
Distinguished council members and town. My name is Brett Moore. I'm a lifetime Los Gatos resident, as well as a Los Gatos business owner. We have a family business in town. And I'm here to not only voice my support for Hoppus to come into Los Gatos, but would definitely argue that Los Gatos needs a place like Hoppus because we really don't have one. My family, I got 3 teenage daughters. My family and I have traveled out to the Willow Glen Hoppus location on several occasions. And on those several occasions, we've met one or more other families that have traveled out to the Willow Glen Hoppus location. And we're all from Los Gatos. And the reason we do that is, 1, Hoppus is a great place, but 2, there's no place in Los Gatos for us to do that. As people have brought up, it's a very social location. And it's where you can go, have a great beer, but more importantly, you can hang out with your family. And it's not that you're just sitting down and drinking or you're sitting down and eating even at a restaurant, but this is a place that really encourages social interaction. Somebody brought up the board games, so I really hope you guys have board games because that's big for my family. But no, we'll go and we'll play board games, bring in outside food, and eat and play the games. And my family just loves it. And again, there's no where else we can do that. And if it's not board games, we can play darts, we can play cornhole. They have basketball hoops. I don't know if Los Gatos will have basketball hoops. But anyways, there's things for the family to do. And I just really feel like there's no place in Los Gatos to do that. And there's no really, of these craft breweries or anything in Los Gatos, where most other communities around us have them, whether it's Willow Glen or Campbell or Scotts Valley or Santa Cruz. I feel like Los Gatos has kind of really missed the boat on that. Not that it's Los Gatos' fault, but just we haven't been able to get one in town. And I think it would be a really good addition to have in Los Gatos. Also, I know Derek and Brian have already been very involved with our Los Gatos community as far as supporting local sports organizations and other local groups and sports leagues, groups, and organizations, which is very important to me, having 3 kids. And if any of you know me and my family business, we're very big in supporting all those organizations, and I know Derek and Brian have been the same. So it would make complete sense to get them more into our community, where I know that involvement will just continue to grow. So obviously I'm in big support of it, and I hope that you see fit to approve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Shane Rogers, and then followed by Doug Ramzani after that.
everyone. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak up here. I'm a longtime resident of Los Gatos as well, born and raised here, and lucky enough to bring my family back here. I have two little ones, a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, live downtown, and frequent Hoppers. I've known these guys my whole life, actually since preschool, so about as long as you could imagine. And this is a definite void in Los Gatos, I think, like was just mentioned. A place to be able to walk to, that you could bring a family and hang out. And I think the outside piece is a big part of that. I think it's great that some of you went to Hoppers to see it, because it is not a bar. Like, I wouldn't be found in a bar with my children. And this is a place where you can come together, young families can come together. And we do this in Santa Cruz, we do it in Willow Glen, but it would be so amazing to have a place here to be able to gather. So, thank you.
Thank you. After Mr. Ramzani is Ken Barker.
Good evening. I would like to speak in support of Hoppers Brewing Company. Through my work as a former administrator at Los Gatos High School, I was able to get to know Derek and Brian very well. Both of them grew up in town, attended Los Gatos Elementary Schools, Los Gatos High School. Derek and Brian were outstanding students, athletes, and citizens throughout their 4 years at Los Gatos High. This is an opportunity for us to welcome back a couple of our homegrown young men. Hoppers will be a family-friendly business where residents can gather, as others have mentioned, have something to eat, a beer, a glass of wine. Derek and Brian will honor our town's guidelines for noise and parking. They were community-minded even as students, and they will contribute to the community and support our schools and our service clubs. Their business will be a positive addition to our town.
Thank you. Ken Barker, followed by Christy Maupin.
Good evening. Ken Barker, 134 Hollycrest. I moved to Los Gatos in 1957 with my family. That's 62 years ago. Attended the high school along with my wife and all 5 of my kids. I've been coaching youth sports in this town for 47 years. Part of the Lions Club, the Methodist Church. I'm now one of the softball coaches at the high school. I've known Derek and Brian for over 20 years. They went to school with my daughters. They were at my house, spent the night at my house. They were the most respectful 2 young men, 2 of the most respectful young men I met. Academically, athletically, they went off to San Diego, Harvard, came back, and now they're willing to put their money where their mouth is, and that's opened a business here in Los Gatos. As people have mentioned, I've gone to Hoppers downtown San Jose several times. I have 5 grandkids, ages 2 to 8. I've taken all of them. They absolutely love it. It's just not your normal, what you think of as a bar. You're sitting there, they're playing games, whether it's Candyland, checkers, or whatever. They're having a good time. Our softball program here at the high school, we do fundraisers. The last 2 years, they've stepped up, not being their business in Los Gatos, but they've stepped up and supplied what we need. We do a beer and wine fundraiser at the History Club, and they've been more than willing to give us free beer that we run. We make a profit to run our high school. I look forward to continually to go to Hoppers, but would just love to be able to, I could walk to the new one here with my family. So I hope everybody takes that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. After Ms. Maupin is Mike Frangidakis.
Council, thank you. My name is Christy Maupin. I'm kind of here. I'm here on behalf of Loma Brewing Company, but also myself as a resident of Los Gatos. Los Gatos is missing what they are trying to bring to town. At Loma Brewing Company, we do not have space for dogs, and I can tell you we turn away customers every day that ask if we have space for dogs. The cornhole, we have cornhole as well. We've never had any issues with it. I can tell you most of the time it turns into 5 and 6 year olds throwing the bean bags around. So I don't. I read some of the letters from members of the community. The craft brewing industry, its customers, they're very family-oriented, lots of young families. And I read some of the letters, and it was a little upsetting to see it compared to some of the rowdier crowds. It's not anything like that. We've been in business for 3 years. We haven't had any noise complaints. We haven't had any issues with any customers urinating in parking lots, no garbage problems. We've only had to call the police on the rarest of occasions. And that was, late night customers coming in from other locations that had, been overserved that we turned away. So the craft brewing industry, we're responsible, and I appreciate that. As a member of the community, I would love to see them come to town. It's something that I would enjoy. We don't have outdoor patio seating, so to be able to go down the street would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. After Mike Frangidakis is Norma Martinez.
Good evening, Council. Mike Frangidakis. As you know, I'm also the Veterans Affairs Commissioner for the county and Los Gatos Memorial and Support Foundation founder. I also would like to speak to the integrity of the boys. They're men now. My son also was in sports with these two gentlemen. I have nothing but the utmost respect. Let me tell you, I used to use these two boys as the examples to my son when he was growing up. So I speak to, I'm very positive about what they do, who they are. I know they'll do the town a wonderful service. They'll play by the rules, and I hope you let them come in. I'm not a bar person myself, but I plan to go to their establishment, have a beer. Thank you.
Thank you. After Norma Martinez is Tom Richards.
Good evening. My name is Norma Martinez, and I am here because I'm the leasing person for this property. It's been about 3 years that I've been leasing, and it has been a very challenging situation based on the fact that this building is set far in the back. We have several limitations with the zoning, so I've shown it quite a bit to prospective tenants, but either, because of the location and if it's for retail, it's just, a very challenging place to lease. There have been, other things. Another area is basically qualifying people who are financially able to come in and occupy the space. When we do have a space like this and it's left vacant for so long, then we have issues with vandalism and homeless people coming in and, damaging the property. So when the Hoppus family came in and, decided that they thought this would be a great location for them, I was very happy, to entertain the business concept. And at this time, I have been in the property, morning, noon, and evenings, and there have never been really any issues with the parking, and possibly because of the other tenants, they've gotten used to the fact that we have had all this parking available in the back. But I'm sure that something can be worked out, especially because at this point, everybody seems to be working with each other to accommodate the parking as is. I think the final thing I want to point out is that the property has an amazing view, and if I were able to lease it to somebody else, whether it's for office use or something of that nature, then I don't think, the general public would miss out on the opportunity to experience that amazing view. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Richards, followed by Derek Thomas.
Good evening. My name is Tom Richards. My wife Lauren and I
moved into 62 Broadway a little bit over 3 years ago. We have a 4.5-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old son who was born, well, not at the house, in a hospital, but he came back to the house. We plan to raise our family here. We move close to downtown for great schools, walkability, proximity to the farmer's market, great restaurants, a good place to go on a date every once in a while, and for a bunch of kids' programs. We rented here for 4 years before buying our home because we wanted to make sure it was the right city for us. We've met the owners of the proposed establishment. They seem like nice guys. I'd love to have them rejoin the Los Gatos community. But the lack of parking for the location is highly concerning to me. I counted 6 spots for an expected occupancy of more than 60 just outside. Our street's parking is already impacted due to parking for many other events, as well as the church. There are no parking controls on our street after 6 p.m. Additionally, we're very close family friends with Andy Law of 29 Broadway. My children play there with Andy and his new puppy, and we often invite each other over for dinner in our respective backyards when the weather's nice. The prospect of sharing his backyard with 50 uninvited guests just over his fence line for those 10 nights a year saddens me. I can't imagine how he must feel about the prospect of doing that every night of the year, cornhole or not. The proposed business is right for Los Gatos. I have no doubt that the business owners are the right people to run a business like this in Los Gatos. They're great brewers, and they clearly have a lot of friends and admirers, but this is the wrong location. Let's find a better spot. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We have a question for you, Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. Focusing on the issue that has come up on noise, music, that kind of thing. Any thoughts? Do you have any thoughts on how that could be addressed in this application?
I mean, it's a fence line away that's about 6 feet tall. It's hard for me to imagine something that makes sense, to be honest.
Thank you.
If it's outdoors, if it's indoors, sure, I could see something like that making sense, but not abutting to a residence, a single-family residence, as well as a number of, there's a rental apartment building right next door to it as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Derek Thomas, followed by Eddie Cluting.
Good evening. My name is Derek Thomas. I'm the co-founder of Polygon Market. We're a creative marketing agency here in town. We've assisted the Chamber of Commerce on marketing a number of events for them, such as the Eat Drink Los Gatos. As a born and raised Los Gatos resident, I'm excited at the opportunity to have homegrown entrepreneurs expand their growing business. My wife and I have visited their Willow Glen location numerous times and are always pleased with their low-key atmosphere, great tasting craft brews, and family-friendly environment. We've hosted networking events there because of that environment, and it's just a place to have a casual beer, have a business meeting, or play Connect Four with some close friends. As a downtown resident, in walking distance from local eateries and boutiques, it's hard to believe, but we feel limited when it comes to the experience Los Gatos have to offer. Our choices usually range from either swanky restaurants or burgers and pizza joints. As convenient as our downtown is, we still feel the need to drive to downtown Campbell, where we find our generation is more present and appreciated. Hoppos would bring a whole new opportunity to this town, which desperately needs to embrace their younger community members. Many young professionals who grew up here in town move outside of town simply because of the social gatherings other neighboring towns have to offer. I think it would be a shame to dismiss these driven businessmen who have grown up here and want to add to this close-knit community. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie Cluting, followed by Gail Randolph.
Good evening, council members. I also want to support voice my support, for Hoppos. I am a resident. I live up of Bear Creek, and I frequent Los Gatos all week long, in the evenings, on the weekends, at the farmer's market. And when I heard that these guys were going to be possibly moving in, this was quite a while back when it was sort of under wraps, under the radar, and that was a possible location. I didn't necessarily think about that place or all the idiosyncrasies that have been talked about tonight about that place. What I thought about was, man, my vision of Los Gatos is exactly what these guys are. And that vision is what I experience, like I said, when I'm in downtown in the evenings, going in and out of boutiques, going to gift shops, going to small restaurants. When I'm there on the weekends on the farmer's market, riding my bike through town, getting a coffee. What is so fun about Los Gatos is not the shops or the names, it's the environment of people and the environment of families and people with their animals and their dogs, with their kids, young and old. And that, to me, is why I was like, man, that is the place that Hoppes needs to be at, because that's who they are. I frequent their Willow Glen location, like a lot of people have said already here, because of that. Because I go down there with my wife, I go down there with my friends, and I can stay out there, have a drink, play some Jenga, and then I can take my nieces and nephews there and play with little cars and have a beer and play some cornhole. So just want to voice my support for Hoppes, because I think it embodies that sort of quick, close your eyes vision of what Los Gatos is with family, community, and friends. Thank you.
Thank you. Gail Randolph, followed by Michael Verga.
Hello, I'm Gail Randolph, 42 Broadway.
Microphone down. Thank you.
There we go. Is that better? Thank you. So I'm Gail Randolph. I live at 42 Broadway. I live in the second house from Santa Cruz Avenue, across the street from the proposed project. My house has been officially sound tested and through the Toll House sound study, and unofficially from the by my personal experience of noise emanating from the Toll House courtyard. The Toll House courtyard includes a sound wall, and that makes it different than this project, and is situated one property past the proposed Hoppes Brewing Company. My house has been subjected to ongoing loud noise that shook my windows and was louder than my television. It has endured loud noise from number 1 Broadway before remediation, and I know noise from the parking lot behind the Los Gatos Bar and Grill. This proposed change from the presently passive use is most unwelcome. I would not like to experience that noise again, nor would I wish it on my neighbors in the adjacent apartments, the first house just over the fence, the houses whose backyards are in direct line to the proposed noise, or those onto which sound bounces. I'm opposed to the change in the CUP for the Hoppe project or for any active use butting up against our neighborhood. I just wanted to add that I also went to the gathering for the neighbors and could only stay a little while because they didn't have chairs, and now I need a chair. And I asked them about the food because it's being known as a restaurant, and he described sandwiches and bar food. He named it bar food. So I think I'm impressed by all the character witnesses too. I just think it's inappropriate for our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Randolph.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Verga, followed by Patty Stepovich.
Hi, my name's Mike Verga. I reside at 46 Broadway Avenue. I also find Derek and Brian, as all the other neighbors and friends find them to be, sincere, concerned entrepreneurs. I have no issue with Derek and Brian whatsoever. I just find that the proposed specific location is unworkable. I would love for them to find another location in Los Gatos, I really would. But the location they have selected separates themselves, their proposed brewery, from a resident and a apartment building by a 6-foot high fence. That's all it is. I really don't think any kind of a restaurant, even if the hours were to be severely restricted, would be appropriate for that location. I really don't see any way for the brew pub to adhere to the noise ordinance when there is no separation between the residents and the outdoor seating. And I think there's a lot of better uses for that property, whether it's a yoga studio or hair salon or personal fitness center, office space, etc. I just don't think that restaurant in that specific location is a good fit. Derek and Brian are obviously well supported by their friends and neighbors. I don't have any problem with them whatsoever. However, I don't think any of these supporters would want this establishment literally in their backyard. And I think that's really the concern that I have for my neighbor and the apartment building. Thank you.
Thank you. Patty Stepovich. Tim Nelson will be after Patty.
Hello, I'm Patty Stepovich. I'm the owner of the Rural Supply property and building. I have a major concern over parking for my tenants who've been a wonderful asset to Los Gatos for many, many years. Their business requires immediate parking close to their door because they sell heavy items. There's not that many parking places allotted in that area for as many people as they're planning on having come to their bar. I think they sound like a wonderful group of people. I'd love to see them come to Los Gatos, but I don't think going through my property to get to their property is the best place. Actually, until this came about, I didn't even know there was a right-of-way through my property, which is now being called the driveway. It was very upsetting. I think that it's a lovely spot, and I do agree with the mitigating the noise from this for the neighboring people, I think is going to be almost impossible. I'm also worried about the maintenance of my, I guess it's called a driveway now. Our tenants have always maintained that. And I'm also worried about liability because I own that property. And in order to get to that bar, you have to drive over my property to get to the parking, to get to the bar, to get to anything. And I think it's a lovely enterprise, but just simply not for that location. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tim Nelson, followed by Paul Bieber.
Good evening. Tim Nelson with Rural Supply Hardware. And I've emailed you my concerns on parking, so there's no point in beating that up. There's simply not enough. Ditto to what my landlord was saying. There's just too much there already to accommodate a business of this size. Clearly, they're very nice guys. I've met one of them, and everybody's supporting that here tonight. But they need to find a different spot. This is just not the right place. The neighbors have major concerns, and they're voicing those well. There's no point in me in beating that one up either. I support them completely in their concerns with the noise. We heard the toll house noise. We heard the number on Broadway noise, and they did a good job taking care of that. There's no reason to add problems like this to this end of town. Find a different spot, please, guys. I think that's all I'll talk about here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Bieber, followed by Larry Leinart.
I'm Paul Bieber, 84 Broadway. My wife and I have lived on Broadway longer than anybody else has lived on Broadway, probably 48, 49 years. My first part of the family came to Santa Clara Valley in 1850, so I'm about as local as you can get. When we first moved onto Broadway, there were no commercial buildings left at the end of the street. There was a Texaco gas station down in the corner. The hotel was already ripped down. Rural Supply wasn't there. It was a big Victorian. So it was pretty quiet in that time. So I've been able to observe the changes and the changes and the changes going on over the years. And it's basically, I like beer a lot. And the guys I've got friends that go down there to Hoppes, and it's a great place. I just don't think there's enough room there where it's proposed. at all. I mean, I'm a contractor. I trade at Rural Supply a lot. I might have 3 trucks there at the same time. We pull in, we're not just getting candy bars, they're carrying out stuff. We've had trouble with the hair salon there because of parking. I got to get my trucks in, get it out. Can you imagine at lunchtime what would happen? I send a guy down, I'm paying, I don't know how much an hour for a guy to go down, pick up material, get to a job site. And then there's people having lunch. You can't even get in there. So I'm going to park, where am I going to park? You know, to try to load material into my truck, get to the job. There's all kinds of people in there that do that kind of trade. You know, so I don't think there's enough parking there for what goes on now, let alone lose parking places for that. I mean, I like beer. You know, I just think there's other places in town that are empty. They're empty. There's lots of them, and they go out all the time. So I just think it's the wrong place. Another thing is how the approval will affect then, you know, businesses go in, businesses go out. What happens when the owner, I think these guys sound great, but suppose they decide, geez, we're making a lot of money, we're going to sell our business. Somebody else comes in, and you don't know them. All the rules are already set. There's no conversation that we're having like now. It's set. So I'm recommending, you know, not even, you know, approve that kind of venue there. You know, or later on that it changes to something else. I mean, it could be a house of prostitution, who knows, you know, that serves beer. But anyway, so that's what I am definitely against the approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry Leinart, followed by Andy Law.
Hi, I'm Larry Linhart from 30 Broadway, and I'm opposed to this approach. First of all, I'd like to highlight to everybody here, this is not about HAPAs. This is about a CUP, which goes for the life of the property. A lot of folks have made some nice comments about the owners, which is terrific, and that's great. But this is more important about the CUP, which goes the property beyond those individuals. And I think all of them probably are family people and have kids play in the backyard, et cetera. And I'm not sure how supportive those folks would be to have a bar in the backyard with the kids playing in the backyard, which is what's happening here. So what we would do is sacrifice the primary residence and the families of a few people that have spent their entire savings to build a house and to build up the house and then have a bar in the backyard. A nightmare for those folks. And I think that's totally unprecedented. And the location is unprecedented. And here's why I think so. I went and looked at 43 bars and restaurants in Los Gatos. I measured how far they were from the main street, how far they were from residents, and I found some interesting things. First of all, the average distance from a main road from a bar or residence is 10 feet. The only one over 100 feet is the Toll House, and Hoppes is going to be 260 feet, so 26 times the town's average from the distance of a main road. And then secondly, the distance from a residence. The average distance from a residence is 750 feet, and the average attenuation is a 2-story building. This property is 0 feet with 0 attenuation. It is so far out of the norm, it's completely unprecedented. Secondly, and the last point I'll highlight is noise. So the noise is a nice perspective because it tries to put a nice barrier in the difference between the residents and the people. From 1 to 10 p.m., when the noise of this location for that CUP, forget Hoppes, is over 61 decibels, it's in conflict. And that's a $500 fine. I sat back there, 30% of the time I sat back there, the room in this noise was over 61 decibels. So it is impossible to have any outdoor activity, no matter what building, no matter what's done, without a significant investment of a 1.5-story building to hide that outdoor noise. So economically, it will not work. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy Law, followed by Andy Edwards.
Good evening. My name is Andy Law. I live at 29 Broadway. I'm the closest neighbor to the proposed location of the CUP. I've also met these gentlemen. I think they're great. I think what they're doing is great. I think the business would be beneficial to the Los Gatos neighborhood and community. But that's really not the issue at hand. The issue at hand here is that the CUP stays with the property for the life of the property. And so while these guys are great, if their business fails, if it goes under, who's that next neighbor that I'm going to have to deal with different laws and rules that have been set in? So that's my main concern. I live here in Los Gatos. I'm a Bay Area native. I lived in Willow Glen before. When I finally could save up enough money to buy a house in Los Gatos, I found one of the crappiest houses, if I'm honest, on one of the nicest streets in Los Gatos, and I invested everything I had in it. And I knew going into it that I was going to be backed up to a retail location. That's what it was zoned as. I was okay with that, and I understand the hustle and bustle that goes on with living downtown, and that's one of the reasons that I like living downtown. But had I known that a bar was going to be there, I wouldn't have spent the amount of money that I spent to purchase that home. And I'm not planning on living here for a few years. I'm planning on raising a family here. I want my kids to be able to play in that backyard. And imagine going home every day after you poured in your blood, sweat, and tears at work to a 60-person party that you didn't invite. I can't imagine anybody on this council would want to walk home to that every single day of the week. So I urge you, please vote against this. It's not about these guys. They're great. I wish them all the success in the world, but it is about this CUP specifically. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy Edwards, followed by Jeremy Bays.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing us to speak. My name is Andy Edwards. I am not related to Brian, although I'd be proud to have Brian as part of my family anytime. I think everything's been said about these two young men. They are great parents. They're great fathers, great businessmen. They've done everything I think the town has asked them to do. They've filled all the squares, and I think they need to be given a chance. And I think that's your opportunity here, is to give these two men a chance to prove that they can do exactly what they've told you that they can do. So thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy Bays, followed by Kim Scaron.
Good evening. My name is Jeremy Bays. I've lived here essentially my entire life. I went to high school with Derek and Brian. I've known them for a long time. A couple points I want to make is, for everyone who's visited their Willow Glen location, it's not a bar, and in no way would I consider it a bar. In fact, I see more, young families and dogs enjoying the nice weather on a Saturday. Closes early. It's very unlike a bar, in my opinion. I also would like to speak to both the character of Brian and Derek. If there was anyone who I think the town of Los Gatos would want to work with on a project like this, it would be the two of them. I think they'll do everything that they can to meet with the town, to meet with the neighbors, and try and find a situation that will work out well for everyone. With the success that they've had in their location in Willow Glen, I know I'm probably not the only one who's noticed Hoppus hats and shirts at Sharks games, at the airport, and I take it I have some pride with seeing those things around and seeing what two guys from Los Gatos have done and what they continue to do. And I hope with the new location, if they come to Los Gatos, come back home, I think a lot more residents in town will have pride that Hoppus is here and it's a Los Gatos business. Thank you.
Thank you. Kim Scaron, followed by Carol Santos.
Hello. It's actually Kim Scaron, sorry. I'd like to voice my support for Hoppus. I'm a Los Gatos resident, born and raised. I'd like to speak on behalf of Hoppus being a family environment. I myself cannot even drink beer, and I've enjoyed going to their current Willow Glen location with my husband and my child. The noise level in their current location has never felt overly loud, to the point where I feel fine bringing my 5-month-old there, even when he was younger. And I plan on bringing him to this location as well. Hoppus has been a great place to relax, grab a beverage, and run into other friends and colleagues. They have created such a unique environment, and I strongly believe that Hoppus would be very successful in Los Gatos. And I agree that this is something that's been missing in this town, and I think everyone will find that it's a great place to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carol Santos, followed by Matt Sridhar.
Hi, my name's Carol Santos. I'm one of the owners of Number 1 Broadway. When I found out that Hoppus Brewery was considering coming to the location behind our property, or our business, I was actually very excited on a number of reasons. The main one is that the south end of Santa Cruz is very slow. The amount of foot traffic that comes down there is either directly for the Spa of Los Gatos, Rural Supply, or after 5 or 6 o'clock for the bar upstairs. I think that if Hoppus went in there, we're going to have more foot traffic, and therefore Rural Supply will actually get a little bit more business than would be known. People will come to Hoppus from outside of Los Gatos as well. Probably Saratoga instead of having to go to Willow Glen. Anyway, that was my feel or my take on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt Sridhar, followed by David Burt.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Sridhar. I'm the owner of the subject property. I'm a real estate developer, and this type of conversation is something that I'm very used to. I have to tell you that I'm sympathetic, with respect to the owners on Broadway, but there's a level of sympathy that I think is relevant to talk about. It's one thing about, when you have somebody who's been here since the town has even got started, and they have issue with noise. I totally get that. But the owner of 29 Broadway bought his property less than a year ago at a bargain price of $1.6 million, knowing well that the property sits next to commercial real estate, knowing well the proximity from North Santa Cruz, understanding jazz on the plaza that happens all the time, that regularly exceeds noise ordinances, understanding the fact that we have the farmers market, which with all the hustle and bustle and traffic there can get noisy at times. So there's a level of sympathy here, and I think we need to take that into consideration. And this is a difficult decision to make, but we have to balance that against the economic viability of Los Gatos. I speak from the perspective of being one of the largest landowners in town, where I've not invested millions, but tens of millions of dollars in a number of signature properties in downtown Los Gatos. One of them being on the corner of Main Street in Santa Cruz, 2 North Santa Cruz, where that property, the retail location, has sat vacant for more than 1 year now. I think I want to have some good news about a tenant, but understand that this is not an easy place to find tenants. We've lost a lot of tenants. LGBG just went out. OPA is out. I don't need to go through the roster of tenants who were leaving. I'm also personally, all of landlords run in the same circle, so I'm very well aware of all the at least 3 or 4 tenants that we've all heard of today moving out. Most of the lenders and larger real estate owners are predicting a recession in 2020. We're already having these issues in town. Recession's not here. Let's let these people come in town. This is a great addition to the town. I've personally vetted these tenants. Let's decide we want to be business friendly. Let's capitalize on the strides we've made with respect to outdoor entertainment and parklets. Let's not go backwards, let's go forwards. Thank you. I'm here to express my support. Thank you.
Thank you. David Burt, followed by Joe Nagos.
I apologize I came late, but I was creating some much needed sales tax revenue for the town this evening. So I wasn't able to hear everybody speak, but from those that I did hear, I've heard nothing but great things about Derek and Brian. My knowledge of these 2 young entrepreneurs is brief, but my experience has been pretty incredible with them. Every year I host a fundraiser for our Los Gatos schools here in town to raise money for mental health through the Lions Club. I asked Brian and Derek if they would like to join us, knowing that they were Los Gatos alums, but not Los Gatos businesses. When they found out about it and what purpose this fundraiser is for, they didn't hesitate. They joined in and they helped support our event, and they're coming back again this year. That's the kind of people they are, and I'm in full support of Hoppus, their business, and what they represent. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe Nigos, followed by David McGregor.
Hello, you have to excuse me, I'm a little under the weather. However, I am a business owner in the town of Los Gatos, but more importantly, I am a resident. My backyard actually is the parking lot to Forbes, pretty much, and I deal with noise levels to a certain extent on a daily basis. However, I chose to move in the town to be in the middle of the action, and because of that, I am in full support of Hoppus going into the city, as well as keeping the town vibrant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. David McGregor, followed by Lee Quintana. If anybody else wants to speak on this, those are my last two cards. So please bring your card forward.
G'day, I'm Australian, so just keep up with the accent if you can. My wife and I own a business in Los Gatos we opened just last year called Redemption. We also have one in downtown Campbell, and we've had that one in Campbell for 4 years. So what we can say from direct viewing is that the outdoor dining scene in Campbell is huge. It's what people go there for. It's what drives foot traffic in the evening, people coming in. We see people coming in later at night, much rather than early in the morning. So something that is going to help that in Los Gatos seems to be, like everyone has said, it seems to be a real void. Outdoor dining in general in the area, people coming out late at night or in the evening to be around, be in town. We don't see a lot of that here. So whether it's this or whether it's another project that brings people downtown in the evening to be outside, to enjoy the evening, I think it's got to be a good thing. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Lee Quintana.
Lee Quintana, 5 Palm Avenue. I think this is a wonderful concept, and I'm sure that Los Gatos would embrace it if it were allowed to, if you approve the CUP. However, I want to go back to what the purpose of a CUP is. This is not a use that is automatic by right. The reason that it's here before us is because it's a conditional use permit, and there are questions about the use and whether it fits into the location where it is. That's the purpose of a conditional use permit, to make sure that there aren't conflicts, and if there are, that they can be mitigated. I think the noise issue is one issue. It was mentioned landscaping. I will tell you from a former work life, doing mainly environmental reviews and reading noise analysis, et cetera, and doing various research for that job. You do not get attenuation for noise from landscaping unless it's at least 100 feet of thick vegetation. Landscaping will not mitigate the noise. The parking, I think, is the biggest issue, because while technically this site meets the town's parking requirements, it is not that close to the parking district. And because there are so few parking spaces on that site, and it's human nature to want to park close to where you are, I think it's going to cause a big problem for rural supply. Now, the other thing about business in Los Gatos is we want to support our existing businesses. This is a business, the Rural Supply, that has been there for more than 40 years. I think Ken and Tim have operated it for 40 years. And I think we have an obligation to make sure that that business survives as well. It would be a big loss to Los Gatos if Rural Supply left there. And on a personal note, I'm not sure I could maintain my home if they weren't there. My husband is there every other day to get a nail or advice, and wonderful advice and wonderfully helpful. They are a real credit to Los Gatos, and I would hate to see anything that would jeopardize that business. Thank you.
Thank you. That was the last speaker card. So I would like to invite the applicant, Mr. Edwards, Mr. Matos, your representatives. You have 5 minutes to comment on anything that the public has shared with us.
Okay. Well, I'm encouraged just to see the participation. I think, you know, this is what a democracy is all about. So, you know, I don't want to just, you know, talk in circles here. I think all the concerns that were raised are stuff that we knew were going to be raised. So I just wanted to reiterate that what we're really trying to do is you know, fulfill our dream of opening a business in our hometown and follow the rules that have been laid out by the town. I guess I'll hit a couple things just real quick. You know, parking was an issue that was brought up several times. You know, we are in compliance with the city code on that. Our hours, while we're asking for a wider range of hours in our conditional use permit, at least our initial hours aren't going to overlap very much with the Rural Supply, especially during the weekdays. So that should mitigate some of it. And as it relates to using that shared driveway, any use is going to, in that back building, is going to require that. You know, I think a lot of people think that this is a great idea and the town needs it, and they suggest finding a different location. Which is, I think, easier said than done. We tried to find other locations. We looked. We had a list of stuff that we needed to make this business viable, and this was the one that we were able to find. We have signed a lease. We had to. I don't know any landlord that would let us go through this entire process. It's been roughly 6 months since we started, or since we signed this lease, and that's been kind enough to abate our rent. But we are about to start paying rent, and we do have a 5-year lease. So that, you know, obviously is a binding legal document. So it would be hard to pivot and try to find another location, even if there was one that would hit all of our needs. And then as it relates to the conditional use permit, we do know that it stays with the property. So even if we were to move out, someone could move in, but they would be locked into those conditions, including closing at 11, so a bar wouldn't feasibly be able to move in. They'd have to close at 11, and they would, of course, have to abide by the same city codes that we would, including the noise ordinance. So if someone did come in with a similar use, they would have to comply exactly the same way we do. So I hopefully you can you know, take all this into consideration, and we'd really appreciate it if we were able to open up in town. Thank you.
Well, before you leave, let's see if you have any questions from our council. I have questions for you. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's issues of noise concerns, parking concerns. There was mention of the CUP running with the land. I want to ask you first, though, how do you come up with the name Hapas? What does that mean?
Well, if you're not familiar with the term, it's actually a Hawaiian word. Literally translated, it means mixed, which is applicable to making beer. A lot of mixing involved. That's what keeps me in such tremendous physical condition you see before you. And also, it sounds like hops, so you know it's a little bit punny. But they also use it to describe people of mixed ancestry. So I'm half Japanese and half Caucasian. Derek is half Chinese, half Caucasian. So we are both Hapas.
Very cool. Okay, so obviously the Rural Supply and the parking situation with Rural Supply. Have you met with Mr. Nelson and discussed how you are going to live in harmony should your project be approved?
I personally have not. Derek did. I don't know exactly what they talked about. But I mean, the spots are marked. If you go look at them, there are signs on each stall that indicate which properties you can reserve those spots and what hours. If those aren't sufficient, we could replace them. But I mean, I think it's relatively common. You see signs like that all the time for shared parking lots. And like I said, our hours aren't going to overlap that much during the week, so that should help as well. But aside from having, just doing diligence with both of our customers, because I'm sure it'll go the other way too, with their customers parking in our lot. I think I'm not sure of a better solution.
Okay. Regarding your hours, your Willow Glen hours are obviously a lot less.
Mm-hmm.
As a compromise to the neighbors, you're new to the community, and there's some apprehension, and you have a lot of voices of support, but of course there are the folks on Broadway who are apprehensive without, reservation, because they've had strong concerns in the past, which were legitimate. Would you be amenable to reducing your hours, and then perhaps later on, if everybody loves you and they request more of your services, perhaps you could expand your hours?
Yeah, I think we would be amenable. I mean, if we scaled it back to 10 p.m., I think that would still be feasible for us.
So it'd be 10 to 10,
What?
7 days a week, or 11 to 10? 7
At
days
least,
a week.
yeah, per the conditional use permit. That's not to say that that's where we would start. I know that doesn't really matter what we do because it stays with the land. But, we are going to have a kitchen, so we don't want to limit ourselves to just dinner service. If we want to add lunch service as well, that's why we asked for 11
Okay.
a.m.
So a CUP runs with the land, and there were comments made by the speakers that if, there was another, you're great guys, but the next guys might not be so great. So in the past, what we've done is offered a compromise, which is called an operating agreement, which basically allows you to operate, but the next applicant comes in, doesn't just get what you have.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, if you were to move on and then there was a bar or somebody who wanted to move in, they would essentially have to reapply. They wouldn't just get your CUP. Would you be open to an idea like that?
I would hate to speak out of turn. I'm just one of 3 partners involved in this. I don't think, we'd obviously have to understand the terms of the operating agreement before, kind of blindly agreeing to it. But, if the terms are amenable to our business and we still foresee a feasible business, I like I said, hate to speak out of turn, but I don't think that we would be opposed to it.
Okay. Last but not least, there was a lot of concerns about noise, obviously, and there was mention of 6-foot-high fence being the only line of demarcation between your business and residential property.
Mm-hmm.
So, in Los Gatos, obviously, there's been establishments such as C.B. Hannigan's, and there's lots of houses around there. They're no longer there, but they kind of grew up together or whatnot, and it became accepted. Yours is now going into a location that has never had, there's number 1 Broadway, the Toll House, and LGBG, but, it was formerly just a storage area, obviously. So there's concerns about what noise could occur. How do you alleviate some concerns about that? We spoke earlier about the town's ordinance of the music before 10 o'clock, acoustic music and things like that. But how would you respond to a party of 60 people right over my fence?
I will first reiterate that we are not a bar where people get drunk and get rowdy. Like I said, we do parties like that all the time, but a lot of times they're little kids' birthdays. So it's just a different vibe, and I think that's part of the process is the education. of who we are, and we aren't that loud, rowdy bar. It really, truly is a casual place to come, sit down, have a beer, have conversation, and not get loud and rowdy. So I think that's important to keep in mind. We are open to any and all suggestions. If it's landscaping, if it's a barrier, a physical barrier of some kind, a combination of the two, I think that we would be open to hearing ideas about the best way to go about that.
Okay. That's it for my questions. Councilmember Sayoc?
So, Mr. Edwards, I want to ask you the same question I asked in the beginning. Have you and your partners discussed how you plan to implement this business given the strict noise ordinance? So without having done a noise study, you really don't know how many people can be outside speaking cumulatively before it goes over. So could you walk me through, should this permit be awarded, how will you ensure that you don't go over it? Do you plan to, so just talk me through what you and your partners have thought of to address that issue.
Well, I mentioned that we are open to ideas. I mean, I have my architect here. We're working with him and a landscape architect on ideas for specific plant species that do a good job of buffering noise. If it's a physical barrier, I don't think we'd be opposed to that either. I'm sure that there's a process for getting that approved as well, which would cause a delay, and obviously that would not be good for us, considering we have to start paying rent soon. But I wish I had like a perfect answer for you. I mean, the fact of the matter is we are an eating and drinking establishment. There is going to be a certain level of noise. It's not going to be, everything that, the few places that have been cited, One Broadway, LGBG, those are bars where there's loud music and people are drinking and staying up late, and we're just not that. So our level of noise inherently is going to start lower than those establishments. And if that still is too high, then we're open to figuring out a solution that works for everybody.
Vice Mayor.
Assuming that an operating agreement tracked any conditions of approval that were put on your business, would you have any issues in considering or agreeing to an operating agreement? Just hypothetically, if it tracked the conditions of approval.
Track the conditions?
It was the same, except it was an operating agreement that the chief of police looked at and the town manager looked at and the town attorney looked at.
I, again, would hate to speak out of turn, but I think that would be something that we would be open to.
Okay, thank you.
We'll go with Mr. Rob Rennie first.
Thank you. Let me go back to something you said. You said your hours don't overlap with Rural Supply, but you said you're going to be open starting at 11, and I'm guessing Rural Supply closes at 5 probably, maybe 4 on Sunday, I can't recall. So that actually sounds like an awful lot of hours. Are you saying you're not really going to have much business during those hours? What are you saying?
Probably not, but I think to clarify, we asked for those specific hours, the 11 a.m. open time, thinking about our future. We currently in San Jose, we don't have a kitchen, so we have no food options aside from the food trucks that come. So it didn't make sense to open up earlier because we have no option for lunch. In Los Gatos, we are going to have a kitchen, so we do have an option for lunch service. We have no plans of doing that initially. And our hours are going to be very similar to what we currently have in Willow Glen, which is closed on Monday, but then the rest of the week we open at 4 o'clock, except Fridays we open at 3. So during the week, our hours are not going to overlap very much. But we've built in the flexibility to change that. We didn't want to pigeonhole ourselves.
And you're not planning to have food trucks come, are you?
No food trucks, no.
Okay. One more question, if I could. Actually, my question, you sort of said you've already signed a lease, but I wanted to ask a little bit more about other locations. It's clear everybody wants you to come to Los Gatos, even the people on Broadway. They just thought maybe there'd be a better location. Did you look at locations like 66 Main Street, or you probably didn't look at where J. Crew is because they just left, but that might have been a better spot also.
Yeah, I I think we did look at some spaces on Main Street. A lot of them are way more robust than what we want. If you've been to the San Jose spot, it's a very, very unique space. It's an old cannery, so it's got these sawtooth ceilings. It's a 100-year-old building, so it's really old, and it's just open. It's just wide open, and then we like shoehorned a brewery and a tap room into it. And we really want to replicate that model. It's been really successful for us. So the space that we were hoping to get in Los Gatos doesn't have to be, we don't want it to be very big because we can't afford it. And we want an outdoor space. And I haven't really seen anything that ticks all those boxes aside from this. And we also need a landlord who's willing to work with us to be able to implement it if it's not exactly to our specifications.
And your bar really doesn't, okay, I shouldn't call it a bar, so you say.
Tap room.
Your tap room really doesn't work if you don't have outdoors.
Definitely not in this location. I mean, for us, as business people, we want to do something that's going to be successful, obviously. And when you look at the landscape in town, a lot of people have mentioned this, there isn't really something like this in town. And so that's why we sort of built our business model around having a communal outdoor space. There may be other stuff, there's going to be stuff that's coming up all the time. For all I know, in 3 years we'll be in the middle of our lease and another space will open up that would have been perfect. But that's, unfortunately, you're never going to find that absolute perfect space. At least in my experience, I haven't been able to.
And I meant to ask this on the parking. Would you be willing to have in your operating agreement or conditional use permit something that required you to enforce the parking, not in the other spaces, the rural supply, I guess, and maybe had something punitive if you did not enforce it?
Well, I think it would have to go both ways, because I would imagine that there's probably a lot of parking, rural supply parking, that would overflow into ours. So I would feel somewhat shortchanged if we were going to be held accountable, but other tenants in that parking lot were not. And we would need to figure out logistically how exactly to do that. It seems almost impossible to keep track of every single car and every single customer and which direction they walk once they get out of the car. But if there's a feasible way to do it, I suppose we'd be at least open to discussing it.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have heard a lot of people who are supportive of your application, and so for this question, I want you just to assume that you are asking for an approval this evening, tonight, for a use, and that use allows you to serve food and beer and wine, and to be inside and to be outside, and then to have a fence between your property and the residential uses on the other side of the fence. Let's also assume that there is a noise issue. Now, you want to get your application approved tonight, and then you want to go forward, but then we still have this noise issue. How would you suggest that I become comfortable with your use and with the people on Broadway, especially the ones who are right on the other side of your fence?
That is definitely something that we are concerned about, that we talked about. I don't know for sure, but I know you all have done this before with the Toll House, and my understanding is there hasn't been any noise complaints since they opened. I don't know that for sure, but that's my understanding. So that seems to have worked out pretty well. We certainly can't go to the same lengths they were able to. They have a lot more money than we do, but I think that there is a solution out there. There is a way to make this work. I'm a brewer. That's what I'm good at. So that's why I'm open to ideas from people who are experts at this kind of stuff. If it's building a physical barrier with landscaping on both sides, I don't know. I wish I had a really good answer for you, but that one, there's a solution, and it's just a matter of finding it.
So what I hear you saying is what you'd like is an approval this evening, but then if there is a noise issue, you'll deal with it as best you can.
I think that's as good as we can get right now.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sayoc.
You mentioned your architect was here, your landscape architect, and not knowing anything about noise attenuation and abatement as well. Is this something that your architect believes he or she can help address?
I'm getting a nod in the affirmative.
Do you mind if we ask your architect specifically ideas that may be implemented?
Seems ready.
Would that be okay, Mr. Mayor?
Please come forward and introduce yourself.
Good evening, City Council. My name is Kevin Matos, Principal Architect with KMA Architecture.
Mr. Matos, if you could pull the microphone up and speak into it.
So, as everyone's alluded to, there are various project types that we've encountered with similar sound issues, daycare centers, and residents that abut highways or freeways. So, there's short of engaging an acoustic engineer, which we could do, we could study, combination of masonry walls and landscape that would, in my opinion, mitigate the sound concern by at least half of what the neighbors might experience now. But in truth, there's no way to mitigate it 100%. And you have this sort of quasi-urban setting anyway, so it's akin to people who live near airports. As airports grow and get more active, it's just the nature of the community. So, but I think from our experience in dealing with other project types, like I said, we do a lot of daycare and medical projects where there's a certain level of noise right next to communities and neighbors. And so the challenge would be for us to design some kind of a barrier. I know it's not popular to talk about walls right now, but but if we're talking about walls, we can design something that I think would hopefully appease the neighbors. So the question is, how high and how far, and do you surround the entire property or part of the property, or just those neighbors who front this particular establishment? So, but I think I'm confident we can come up with something maybe that they might be happy with. But it would have to involve an acoustic engineer to come up with some data if you want that level of comfort. Yeah.
Okay. I think you've answered the question for now. Does any member of council have further questions for anybody? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing and we will go to our comments. Vice Mayor.
I'm just going to jump in and make a motion and then have everyone vote for it. We've heard a lot of comments. Thank you all for coming out. This is an application for a conditional use permit that was approved unanimously by those present at the Planning Commission. At that hearing, no one came to speak about it except for the applicants. There were 11 emails, 9 in favor and 2 opposed. One of the ones in favor, interestingly enough, was Mr. Verga. We now have controversy, and we have emails, generally all from people who live on Broadway. That's not to say that they don't have rights that we shouldn't consider as members of the council, but we have an entire town that we need to be governing for. And so I just want to remind the council of some actions that the town has taken and some policies that the town has that pertain to this property. The first one is that this property is zoned C2, that's our commercial district for our downtown, which does allow businesses such as this under a conditional use permit. In fact, this property has a hotel next to it, a store in front of it, an apartment house catty corner behind it, a spa and a bar on another side. Off diagonally there is a house. Those houses, it's been pointed out, are in the downtown. and presumably they know they're in the downtown and take advantage of the downtown. That's not to say that they should be burdened entirely disproportionately, but they need to expect that there's some burden from that choice. So our job here on the council is not to eliminate every burden. Our job is to attempt to mitigate those where it's possible. So I would agree with Mr. Edwards, who got up and said that this council needs to give them a chance. We are not here to say, no, you cannot do anything. We are here to figure out how they can be given a chance to operate in a district that's actually zoned for their business. So this business actually complies with our parking requirements. We have anecdotal stories about people don't park where they're supposed to, et cetera, but the fact is that they do meet our requirements. And whether that's through a parking district or through actual parking is a decision the town made a long time ago. How the owners of those properties that split that parking lot figure out where the parking ought to be is a private matter between them, not one for policing for the town. And so all we have to do is figure out, is there parking that satisfies our requirements? Yes, there is. With respect to our noise ordinance, we have one that's in place for the downtown. We cannot do, Councilwoman Sayak, a noise study with a business that doesn't exist. So what we can do is put conditions in place that are based upon our best experience, that would be the toll house, that attempt to mitigate those conditions. Now, whether or not the people that live on Broadway think that they've been perfect, I'm not going to say they have been, but there certainly has been less controversy about the toll house recently, and one of the factors has been that the residents feel that they have a voice in what happens, that they have someone to report to, and that there is a way to make sure that their concerns are heard. There's no reason that that kind of thing can't be built into any conditional use permit that happens here. Other things that I'll say historically about the town council's actions: on January 22nd, the council voted to make our downtown a priority and to revitalize that downtown and bring life and activity to it. On January 29th, NBC Bay Area ran a news story indicating that businesses were closing in Los Gatos because our rents were too high. And in speaking with our economic vitality manager, another reason is that the regulation and the hearings such as this that we have on businesses that are otherwise theoretically allowed to come in are so frightened of this process that they do not come. So what have we lost? OPA, Los Gatos Bar and Grill, Gymboree, that's for a different reason, J. Crew, and Viva on Los Gatos Boulevard. But I'll point out as I speak that with respect to Los Gatos Bar and Grill, that's something that's leaving this area that's impacted. And so the experience with Los Gatos Bar and Grill cannot be rightly put onto this application. They deserve a chance to prove that they are different than that. With respect to OPA, it's a place where younger people can come and eat relatively cheaply in Los Gatos, which is not really an option. Viva was relatively cheap, now that is gone too. So we made an effort as a council to make our downtown a priority. We gave the chamber money. Now they want more, but we gave them money. We supported the projects. We've put policies in place to allow outdoor seating because we know that that is desired. We know that the demographic and the changing aspects of urban communities want that outdoor seating. They want the place to go. And we also gave $1 million in a kitty to support our downtown, and we also agreed to a parklet program, a pilot program for parklets that take away parking in our downtown so that we can bring some vitality. We took all of those steps to try to get back what Los Gatos used to have, which was the place that you would go. We're not that place anymore. That place is Campbell. So it would be, all we would be doing, and I forgot to mention the Nextdoor thread that maybe you're familiar with if you follow that, which was echoing the business closure problem, questioning what the town council had done and how was the town council going to support things. And the town is actually responding to that a bit. And Ms. Wren is actually going to be hosting a broker breakfast on February 28th to talk to people, to tell them Los Gatos is open for business. If this council were to take an action tonight to deny this application without even attempting to mitigate the conditions, we would be proving all of those naysayers correct, and we would be saying that our priorities, we didn't really mean it, and so we need to be standing up for what we decided earlier. With respect to this particular business, I did visit the Hoppus Brewing Company in Willow Glen. It is not a bar. It is more like somebody's house that just is a big warehouse. There are just balloons with kids having birthdays. There are people at tables that are there for as long as they want. There's a configuration of tables that looks like a little dining room, for lack of a better term, that has a little table where you can play games. Kids were playing Jenga. Dogs were walking around. I've never seen so many dogs in a indoor establishment in my life. And it was full of strollers. I got there on Sunday at about 5:45. For the hour I was there waiting for my son, a millennial, the crowd diminished. There were much fewer people as the evening got later because the people took their young children and their dogs home to go to sleep. So it's not what we think of in Los Gatos as the bar that we need to prevent. It's a completely different model. So with that said, I am making the motion to approve it with conditions that I believe we can try to mitigate the concerns that the neighbors have raised in a way that our experience proves has at least worked somewhat, or maybe a lot. And that would be to approve the project with the conditions that the Planning Commission imposed in Attachment 4, which include, no TVs outside and acoustic music outside were what they added. In addition to that, I would like to add a reduced hour to 10, as the owners have indicated they're willing to do. A landscaping and noise dampening condition that the architect indicated he can work on. That the outdoor area be contained by planter boxes that also contain some kind of noise dampening. And I would expect that those would have to also be adequate to separate them from parking so that there is not a safety issue that our PPW and our police are going to have to look at. And that we make sure that the owners or representative are available for contact at any time that the business is open to address issues or respond to issues that neighbors might raise about safety, about noise, about traffic, about parking. And that I would add a condition that the owners negotiate an operating agreement with the town that reflects the conditions of approval if in fact it's approved this evening.
All right, we have a motion on the table. Do we have a second? I will second the motion for all the reasons stated. And I would like to add that I think this is a great business. It's a great opportunity for Los Gatos. And I'm actually very excited that this has been presented this evening and you've chosen to come to our community. So thank you for that. And I think it's important to reiterate that we must consider to give the proprietors a chance. And I think that when it comes to the concerns of the residents, again, part of what makes Los Gatos great is your proximity to these wonderful assets, these wonderful attributes that make Los Gatos a fun place to live. And I think this presents a new idea, a new opportunity for more of that. So that's a second. Councilmember Spector.
Mr. Mayor, may I have a question of staff?
Yes, you may.
Assuming that this motion is approved, how will the noise impact on the neighbors on the other side of the fence? I'm going to use them specifically, the apartment and the single-family dwelling. How will that be determined in the chicken and the egg kind of scenario? So what comes first? The use goes in, and then it's too noisy, and then what happens? Or the use goes in, and it's just fine. How's that all going to play out?
So the use goes in, and if there were any issues, they'd be filed with our code enforcement officer, who would go out there and measure the noise and deal with it appropriately. If we found that they were out of compliance with the CUP, then we would look at the conditions of approval, which may require that they go back to the Planning Commission for additional review.
And remind me, at the property, at the boundary, what is the decibel level?
While Ms. Schutman is finding that answer for you, if the motion that is on the floor requires noise dampening and landscape improvements, as well as planter boxes with noise dampening, so there's actually a step in front of any actual noise complaints in terms of noise dampening facilities being added to this permit.
Understood, but I was looking to give as much assurance as possible, both to the applicant and to the neighbors, that it is compliant before the business starts, and then, oh my God, it's too noisy.
So the noise decibel level would be 70 at the property line.
All right. And do we have any idea what it is naturally? I mean, this, do you know what it is?
I don't have that information
Okay,
currently.
thank you. All right. I will probably support the motion, but I'm not positive yet. But then, given all the testimony that we've had, it is accurate. This is not an application for these specific applicants. It's going to be a use. This is a conditional use permit. So it'll be a use for a restaurant with beer and wine and outdoor seating. It will be a use that is literally, right now, a wooden fence away from residential uses. It is true that this is a conditional use permit, and it is true that you can have restaurant bar uses in a C2 zone, but you get them with the conditional use permit. And somebody else mentioned that. And that's so that the town can evaluate that use. And a conditional use permit, and one of the speakers said this, there's not a heck of a lot of us who are techie enough on this, but a conditional use permit has to be consistent with the general plan. And our general plan states that in the noise element of the general plan, it speaks to the quiet residential community against which issues of noise must be measured. It talks about new land uses are not to adversely affect the neighboring uses. And then it specifically says that commercial adjacent to residential needs protection which may be above and beyond our noise ordinance. So that is part of our general plan, and in order to get a conditional use permit, it has to be consistent with that. I'm hopeful that this motion and the applicants and the staff are going to be able to create a situation that is not adverse to those neighbors, especially the two immediately adjacent neighbors.
Thank you. Mr. Rennie?
Thank you, Mayor. A question for staff. So when we approve a CUP, we have to be worried about the next person that assumes the CUP won't be as nice as these young men. In staff's opinion, the way we're wording this motion, do we have protection against the next use? Or is there something we can be adding?
Protecting against the next use in what sense?
Well, so we're approving something that has a kitchen and it has alcohol. So the next one that comes in might be everybody stand outside and drink a lot of beer type of place. Do we automatically have to allow that next use in this space?
So long as they comply with the big issue would be noise, as long as they're complying with our noise ordinances and all our laws and the conditions of approval, then yes. If not, then code enforcement would start and the possible revocation of the CUP. The other part of it is that with the condition added with the operator's agreement, it would require that the new tenant or business would have to also sign an operating agreement, and through contact with them, if staff felt that there were other issues that need to be addressed, we could add those into the operating agreement. So it does give you at least a layer where they're going to have to sign an operating agreement.
And if another use came in, the operating agreement would all be handled at the staff level, wouldn't come to PC or to council.
That's correct. It's approved by the police chief, the community development director, and myself.
Okay. I have maybe a question for the maker of the motion. I was thinking, I guess your speech was, let's give them a chance. Several people, Mr. Edwards said, give them a chance. They said they're going to open at 3 o'clock. And I'm thinking about a lot of the parking overlap issues. Currently, it says, the CUP says 11 o'clock. If we change it to 3 o'clock, that starts to eliminate a lot of the overlap. If you start thinking about the parking nearby, the post office closes at 5. The post office closes at 3 on Saturday, not open on Sunday. There's another parking lot across the street. So I think as they're proposing to run it, there's not going to be much parking conflict, potentially with the spa, because they've got to share their parking now with their same landowner. But again, those other spaces across the street are more open near the post office and so forth. If this CUP easily goes to the next person that may decide to operate at 11 going full blast, maybe it's better to change it to be a 3 o'clock open, or okay, maybe 2 o'clock open. And then if everything's going wonderful, they can modify in the future. So that's a question for the maker of the motion.
So if that's a request to amend the motion to change the operating hours, I will politely decline, and I will tell you why. Mr. Edwards indicated that they're going to have a kitchen. Because and if you've been to any restaurant in Los Gatos, you are perfectly aware that even though their conditional use permit might say that they can be open from 11 to 12, and people that work late are very happy that they get to go to a restaurant late, you show up at 9 and they're closed. Because their business doesn't justify them being open for that long, and that's not how their model has worked. What Mr. Edwards said is that if they're going to have a kitchen, you have to have prep time for that kitchen to be preparing food. So if you say you cannot open your business until 2, you're not serving till 3 or 3:30, which eliminates their lunch. So I think that with the reason I put the operating agreement into the conditions is that with each person that comes in, that can get discussed if it's an issue, but it's much easier, as I think we all know, and certainly those of us who've been on the Planning Commission, it is much easier to revoke a permit or change a permit than it is to come back and expand a permit. So I think it's unrealistic to say, oh, well, you can come in later if it's all going well and make it bigger. That, in my experience in Los Gatos, that's never happened. So I'm comfortable with the hours. I'm comfortable with the operating agreement controlling for parking. I'm comfortable with our own ordinances and requirements for parking, controlling for parking. I'm comfortable with the self-interest of the business owners in that area, controlling for parking. So I don't want to change the hours to accommodate a parking problem that may or may not exist.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Sayoc.
Okay, since we're looking at our conditions of use, I have a simple request for the use in the CUP. If we just changed it so we add the word craft, the approved use is a restaurant with craft beer and wine service. I have to admit I'm not much of a beer drinker, but when I talk to people about what differentiates you versus a regular bar, I'm told that craft breweries take pride in actual taste versus quantity. And so I think maybe a distinguish like that to help identify that this is not one that one would go to consume large amounts, but for the ambiance and for the quality of the beer might help assuage some fears that this is going to be a late night establishment that I think we on the council are trying to prevent. I know there's been a lot of discussion about noise, and I understand that you can't do a noise study without being in occupancy yet. But I do think for your benefit, it's for your benefit to immediately find out what your noise will be through whatever simulation your architect can help you with. I think what we all want is a business that will survive and thrive, and the only way to do that is to live harmoniously with your neighbors. I would request, but not make it in a motion, that you do have a community meeting on a regular basis. We ask that of the Toll House, to talk with your neighbors and see how it's going and what other suggestions might be readily available to help if there are some issues in the first few months as you're in operation. I think what has been established here is that you're two wonderful men that want to do a business that's community friendly, and the more you open those lines of communication to show what that means, I think would be appreciated. I really think that the term of let's see how it goes, let's give them a chance, that strikes a chord with me. I will be supporting the motion, but I do need to let you know that enforcement is here, and so these are things that we will be taking seriously, and I look to both of you, the three of you actually, to show how upstanding a business you can really bring to the community.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I will happily amend my motion to include the term craft beer, if you accept that as the seconder.
I will second that. Councilmember Spector?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There was a comment made somewhere along this about conflicting uses, the residential and the business being conflicting uses. And what I hope you're hearing up here is that it doesn't need to be conflicting uses. They can both work together, but in this case, it's going to take the initiative of the business owner to make that happen, because it's going to revolve mainly around the noise. So I'm hoping that we don't hear about conflicting uses. I'm hoping that we're going to ultimately hear about compatible uses.
Thank you. Councilmember Rennie?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to ask staff if they could read back the motion before we call the question.
Okay, I think between all of us, we think we have it. So approve the proposed conditional use permit with conditions as recommended by our Planning Commission, with additional conditions such as the hours of operation to end at 10 p.m. daily, to address noise issues through landscape and noise dampening at the property line, as well as through planter boxes, with landscaping and additional noise dampening, assuming in the parking area, that there is a owner/representative contact, so that way the neighbors can have a contact person to respond to any issues, whether it be parking, noise, etc. That there is a negotiated operating agreement that reflects the conditions contained in the use permit, and that we amend the definition of beer to include the word craft. So this would be a craft beer and wine establishment.
That's correct.
Follow-up question, if I could?
Yes.
So how do I feel assured that they're supposed to do landscaping, but how do I know it's not going to be just a token amount of landscaping versus some, let's call it, robust landscaping effort?
Well, again, through the building permit stage, staff would evaluate the updated plans to make sure that they are consistent with the approved conditional use permit. And Director Paulson may have some additional ideas, but basically we would look at materials, both plant materials as well as the construction materials of those items, to make sure that they provide some sound dampening.
And is there some requirement for the size of the plants, that we don't have to wait 3 years before they grow up and be useful?
That was not stated in the motion explicitly, but if the maker of the motion or the council wishes to provide any additional specificity, staff is open to that.
All right,
All right. Further discussion? Questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? It passes unanimously. Congratulations. We are going to take a 7-minute recess before we move on to item 12. Thank you. All right, we're going to call the meeting back to order and move on with item number 12 on our agenda this evening, which is discussion of the 5-year forecast and other budget assumptions. And our report will be delivered by Mr. Arn Andrews.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I'd like to just make a couple of introductory comments, and then our assistant town manager will take it from there. Just wanted to say that this is a discussion item for council's consideration, so that way you can dive deeper into our budget assumptions. This is a team effort, as is most of our staff work here in the town. So I do want to recognize the efforts of our finance director, our budget and finance manager, as well as our assistant town manager in putting this together. Right. And with that, I'll pass it to our assistant town manager. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Town Council. As the town manager just indicated, this is another stop along the way in a journey that we started first with the production and ultimate showing of the CAFR, followed by our strategic priorities. This evening, we're now gleaning more information as we keep moving forward to an ultimate proposed operating budget and adoption in the May-June timeframe. Every year, staff puts together what we refer to as the 5-year financial forecast. And in years past, the forecast has really only contemplated what we consider a base case. We've been in an upwardly mobile economic environment for the past 10 years, and a base case was sufficient. But if you look at most of economists nowadays, they do feel that we're coming into a position of transition. And as we start to move into whatever that transition economy is, staff thought it was appropriate to provide council and our community with additional information to help understand what some of the sensitivities are around building a forecast. If you notice in the executive summary, you can see that we created a greater growth scenario, and then we also created what we've referred to as a less growth scenario. I will comment that the less growth scenario is nothing quite as drastic as a recessionary environment. So both of these other scenarios are really just modest changes to 3 of our highly economic sensitive revenues, and then our predominant pension contribution for the unfunded liability in the event CalPERS weren't to make their assumed return of 7%. As you can see in the summary, we have what we refer to as moderate deficits for the forecast period in consultation with our finance director. Those historically have been able to be cured throughout the remainder of the forecast period, either through additional revenue assumptions or through lower expenditure assumptions. But if you start to look at the greater growth scenario, you see that those deficits start to right themselves, and by the later part of the forecast period, we actually start to see surpluses. However, if you move to the less growth scenario, you see that what was moderate deficits quickly start to accumulate to larger deficits. And once again, these are just making incremental changes around the base case. For instance, for property tax, the base case anticipates 3% growth. The greater growth is only 2% more, and the less growth is only 2% less. So instead of growth of 3%, you can see that if we were to have 1% throughout the forecast period, surpluses start to accrue faster than anticipated in the base case. I'll also point out that an area of discussion leading up to tonight was also trying to identify if there are other, what we refer to as kind of one-time budget considerations for council. So you'll see in the later part of the staff report, we have identified several areas for your consideration. One area is compensated absences. With recent developments in our labor negotiations, compensated absences has historically been programmed at about 100%. We feel that it's prudent to now move that down to 50%, and in making that internal policy change, it would free up approximately an additional $1 million that the council could consider as a one-time consideration. We've also had considerable conversations around how the monies flow through the capital reserve fund, and if all those monies have been previously allocated. You'll see in the staff memo there's a table that illustrates that when you start at the $14.4 million we've discussed, you take out previous council allocations in the prior budget, and then you look at what historically has been 5-year programming of $550,000 for the CIP. It leaves us with roughly $7 million. When you look at the $3.7 million that was discussed during the council strategic priorities, it really leaves about $4 million of unallocated funds. However, the memo does indicate, and I will reiterate, it's important to note that if council were inclined to reallocate that 4 million, you really have no other revenues that you've identified for additional capital improvement projects going forward. With that, I believe the memo kind of provides a lot of information, and as the town manager mentioned, your finance director and your finance and budget manager and myself and others are here to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to get us all hopefully on the same page. Your agenda item says discuss. So I'm going to be asking you what you as a staff person anticipate from us when you say discuss, because on January 18th we had an agenda item that said identify priorities, and we didn't make any motions. So we all said what was on the top of our heads. So what are you looking for when you say discuss?
Thank you, Council Member. As I mentioned, this is another stop in a journey that ultimately leads to the council taking action on a adopted budget. One of the roles of staff is to help present you with information that will help you have the most informed decision process along the way, and also our community. As attachment 1 indicates, we started at the top with the development of the CAFR. Once the CAFR was closed, that identified a surplus of 3.7 million. We then moved into strategic priorities to get a sense of how would council like to allocate the 3.7 million. That starts to give us a sense of your priorities as the town manager and staff works to build a proposed budget. Tonight, we're providing additional information as you contemplate next steps heading into May, June, which is we have a budget that right now has razor-thin margins, and it's a budget that's highly susceptible to any changes in the base case. And so that's just information for the council to take as you think about the proposed budget. We also identified what we feel is an additional one-time allocation of money of about $1 million that council can consider the same way you considered the 3.7 million during strategic priorities. And based on previous council discussion, we did take a look at the capital reserve account with the 14.4 million there, and staff's analysis shows that approximately 4 million has never previously been allocated before. And so that is an area where if council wanted to consider alternative allocations, you could, but with the caveat that that means you have no other identified revenue source for CIP in the future.
And if I may just add, the purpose of this report also is to address some of the questions that have been coming up about how it is that we do the forecast. Since last September of 2018, we've been asked to be much more express about our budget assumptions, so that's why you have the level of detail. In particular, on page 15 of 17 is a chart. One of the other items that council asked us to return with was, given the strategic priorities that council identified on January 22nd, there was an interest to see the specific dollar amounts. So the easy ones were the chamber summer events, where there was a specific dollar amount called out of $10,000, and the business improvement district, $15,000. Downtown revitalization had a specific budget identification of $1 million as a start. And so then staff just distributed the remainder of the 3.7 across the pension OPEB and the pavement improvement, given that those were also of interest to the town council. So we wanted you to see kind of how those dollars were starting to present themselves, and then also in response to another council member question, how the funds of 14.5 million were distributed. So you've got essentially a series of information data tables that are trying to answer the questions that have come up over time, as well as a series of exhibits such as attachment 6, which is a graphic that shows how surplus monies flow into ultimately our GFAR, and then the second side of that graphic is the actual capital improvement program, so you can see how our capital and special projects reserve flows then into our general fund appropriated reserve and ultimately into projects. So with this agenda item, it's purposely not an action item because we wanted to provide the council an opportunity to ask questions, hence the word discussion. So we're not asking for any particular motion, but we do want to give you an opportunity as our council to dive into these assumptions because they are what we would be carrying forward as we build your next budget. Thank you.
Thank you. So does council have any questions at this time for staff? Seeing none, we can go to the public. I have no speaker cards on this item
I do.
yet. Please come forward if you'd like to speak. My first card, Jack Von Nada.
Yeah, I put the clicker up there. Yeah. I'm getting it going right now. It is? Give me 1 second. That's interesting. That's funny. I've got it. Give me 1 second. Try to click that. I don't even see the cursor anywhere. I don't even see the cursor now. Duplicate. I don't have a cursor anywhere. Yeah, so I can move this slide. I just can't get it up on the screen. There it is. It was there for a second.
What changed the colors? That was green. Well, work with brown. Good evening. My name is Jack Van Nada. First, I'll let you know that I am going to skip some slides due to my tendency to speak too fast.
Microphone
sorry.
out or speaking. Thank you.
The following slide presentation is to show council and staff the advantage of using an amortization base to pay down pension debt. The main advantage will be to pay down specific layers of the pension debt while adding cash flow to the town's income statement. Use of the amortization base is one of the several recommended by the Bartels report. This slide shows the effect of reduced payments after making one additional discretionary payment of $10,500,000. Note that from 2018 to 2029, the annual unfunded liabilities will rise by 252%. That's the front-end load that we are talking about, where the town is going to have these increasing costs and going to need money. The white column on this graph is the increase of the unfunded liabilities without a pay down, and the yellow columns starting at, that should say, oops, there. It should say 2020. It kept going back to 2000 for some reason, but 2000 to 2020 to 2029. That is what it looks like with the reduced payments. So what can we do? Assuming that we can agree on the facts, we would suggest pay $10.9 million today, and we can save paying almost $9 million in interest over the next 26 years. There's a payment efficiency ratio that will be 1.74, or in other words, you get back $1.74 for every dollar that you spent. The council made an additional discretionary payment in 2014 that was called the sidecar payment of $4,500,000. Our total cash available at that time was $64,900,000. 4 years later, we had $73,900,000 of cash, or a $9 million increase in just 4 years. If we paid down UAL by $10.9 million today, we would still have $2,700,000 more cash than we had in 2014 after the sidecar payment. The council will have $729,000 per year for whatever is needed for 26 years. That total will equal $18,956,000. What's next? We're pointing out what we think is a good option, though there are others. We're only giving options. Ultimately, it is the council's decision, if I may, I'll do one paragraph. Ultimately, it is the council's decision with staff's advice. Ours is only one position of many. However, with the potential for even larger increases to unfunded liabilities over and above what you see on these graphs, we need to do something before mid-May to have an effect on the next fiscal year.
Thank you, Mr. Valneda. Mr. Rennie has a question for you.
Just one quick one. Since you had to go quickly and you couldn't tell us where you came up with all these numbers. So the 726, I think you said we were going to have extra money to pay down. Is that before or after we deduct for our loss of income that's currently making 2% on the $10 million?
If that is before, the 1.75 on roughly the 10,000,009 is about 193,000. So you'll have a net difference of the 193, the 729 minus 193.
Okay, thank you.
All right, that's it. Thank you. Philip Cohen. Say something about that on TV.
I wish I had something more exciting like beer to talk about. You seem really packed the house. There we go. Can everyone see this? I really hadn't planned on addressing the council. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. But I wanted to correct which I think is some misinformation. You've heard over and over again that there's this $3.7 million of surplus. This is attachment 5 out of your packet. I wish we could make it a little bigger. But the point being here is, in actuality, there's no $3.7 million that appears on the schedule, which is basically showing you the change in the capital special projects reserve from last year to 2018. Doesn't show up. Nowhere. What actually happened was that you had about a surplus about 1.1 million, and then there was a bunch of entries where we took reserves from other reserve accounts and put them into this account. So net at the end of the year, we had a 6.1 million increase, which is not allocated anywhere. It's available to the council today. I'm only pointing this out to you because you seem like we're struggling to find 15,000 to give to the Chamber of Commerce. We're looking for 10 here. There's 6.1 million that's simply unattached. And that's all I wanted to draw to your attention. I don't know where this 3.7 million comes. It's not on the schedule. This is the schedule you were presented in the packet. So I'm available to questions.
All right, thank you. No questions.
Okay, great, thanks.
Catherine Summers.
Thanks, Council, for having me up here again. But
but since I'm still here, I thought I would comment on this topic. So I wanted, and since it's just a discussion, I wanted you to revisit our request earlier for the $22,000 for the initial phase of the PBID. If you pass it, we can begin this tomorrow, because I can call Civitas and tell them to get started. Again, I'll reiterate that I think the information that we'll get in phase one in phase one will be data that you will find very useful as we go forward, whether or not it comes to full fruition. With that, of course, if we do get past phase one and Civitas tells us that they think we should continue on, that remaining $46,000, $46,000, I have other avenues where I can get that, and I will not come back to council for that. You have my word. You also, if we do end up passing it, you will get that $22,000 back. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that. Then with regards to the $1 million kiddie fund, I'm a little unclear if that is actually on the table and if you have to vote on that or if it is already passed. And if, in fact, it is already passed, I wanted you to perhaps discuss tonight amongst yourselves or later, how would you go about the oversight of that? I mean, would you want an oversight committee, kind of like you have with the, so I just thought that that might be a discussion, because I think that would be a huge win for the public to know that you granted that $1 million. But as I said, I have already receiving so many ideas of what people would do with that. So I just wanted to be able to know how to pass that along to everybody, of how they can contribute, give their ideas and how you will be vetting those ideas. But I made it on time.
All right, thank you. No other cards, so we'll close the public testimony and council can discuss any questions we have from the speakers. I have a couple questions based on some of the commentary. So Ms. Summers mentioned when will we be making a decision about the 22,000? I think we made a decision about 15,000 already, and they are looking for another 7,000. So when would that point in time come where we can allocate 7,000 more if we decide to do that?
Well, originally, when we were doing strategic priorities, it was really for next fiscal year, for our fiscal year starting July 1. However, given the interest of the chamber, the staff is interested in preparing an agreement with the Chamber of Commerce for the BID study, where we would stipulate how much the town would be granting to the chamber. There would be an arrangement around the data sharing, and then we would bring that contract to council later on this spring. It would require an additional budget adjustment because it's not something that's currently budgeted. So there's a little bit of mechanics to make it happen this current fiscal year. And then we would ask you to formally accept this contract with the chamber, and you would have the option at that point of adding the additional money. So at this point, all you've done is provided us direction for next fiscal year. We still have the formal arrangement with the chamber to work through. So that's something that of how you would handle the going from 15 to 22 if you choose to do so. In terms of the 1 million, at least as staff heard it, and we apologize if we misunderstood, we understood that the 1 million was for a future downtown improvement set of projects, that it was essentially that we're going to be doing a parking study, we're doing these pilots for the parklets and one-way streets, and there's been a lot of talk about how do we refresh the streetscape for Santa Cruz Avenue, and that is not a cheap undertaking. It's going to be very, very expensive, costing millions of dollars. And so the idea was that we would begin to create a fund for that big project. And this would be a project that would be beyond the capacity of a business improvement district. So it would really be a town infrastructure project. So the million is would go towards that. But if council has a different idea and would prefer the million to go towards other things, we could certainly discuss it. But at least as we heard it, we thought it was the beginnings of a much bigger replenishment and refresh for the downtown.
Okay, thank you. So, with reference to the speakers, Mr. Von Naden and Mr. Cohen, and their approach to paying down unfunded liabilities and the cash that they see versus the cash that we might see, can staff provide some commentary on those items?
Certainly, and this will be probably best discussed at your next pension and OPEB trusts oversight committee meeting, which is scheduled for March 5th. But this is not a new concept. This is something that staff has actually recommended to the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee was not interested in a pay down to CalPERS. They felt that the money would be better spent given to our PARS account and having it grow. Council could certainly revisit that discussion, and staff would be available to provide additional advice to the Oversight Committee on March 5th. And let me just ask if our Assistant Town Manager wanted to add anything else, given his expertise in this matter.
I would just say that conceptually, staff has never not thought that there could be a point in time where additional lump sum payments could be targeted at specific, amortization bases. When we brought forward the conversation about possibly moving towards a reduced amortization period in its entirety from 30 to 20 years, that got discussed a little, and as the town manager said, it was decided that, at least in the interim, the preference was to have monies go directly into PARS for a future use. That being said, in the current valuation environment of the marketplace, I think consistent with the recommendation that staff had and that the Finance Committee did, we would not recommend a lump sum payment at this point. We would probably recommend some form of dollar cost averaging, or waiting until there's some type of mean reversion in the marketplace and we start to see better valuations. Because if you were to do a single lump sum payment right now, well, at that point in time for that actuarial valuation, you will see a reduction in interest expense and you will see a reduction in contribution. However, you will be at the vagaries of the next actuarial valuation. And if there were a period, as we saw in the 5-year forecast, where instead of earning 7%, they earned 1%, or even worse, they had negative returns, basically most of the benefit that you would receive would start to be unwound with new actuarial valuations and recalculating new unfunded liabilities. And so lump sum payments are something that staff has always thought would be beneficial, but I think there is a little bit of a market valuation element to that decision.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Spector?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The issue that was before us on the Finance Committee, I didn't understand it as a lump sum discrete payment on the CalPERS selected by certain years so that, to me, from the community information that we got, was a new piece of information. I also think, if I recall correctly, that Mr. Bartel may have made that as a recommendation, or at least as an option. So I know that that you were just discussing it. I know it's come from the community, but for me, in the format that we currently have it, it is a new idea, and I don't know whether it should go back to the Finance Committee, come straight to the council, go to our trust, whatever it is, meeting that we're having next meeting. I would like it to be revisited in some format, in some venue.
Councilmember Sack?
Actually, Councilmember Spector mentioned the things that I was going to mention. And I'm wondering, in preparation for this March 5 meeting, and again, it's been a while since Mr. Bartel came and presented to us, but he had various, if I recall correctly, he had various options that he recommended. And we didn't have a lot of time to go into those options. One of those was those staggered amounts. Frankly, I don't really understand the staggered amounts, but I'm wondering if, given what Mr. Andrews had just said, putting money in different line items, would that create any difference in the overall amount, given the economic situation we're at. Does that make sense? I'm looking at Director Conway or Mr. Andrews. Go ahead.
It does make sense.
Okay.
And this is a conversation that took place at the Finance Committee. Theoretically, the money that's in PARS, if it earns the exact same rate of return that CalPERS identifies as their rate of return, then over time, that money will accrue at the same fashion as it would have had it been with CalPERS. Theoretically, if all that happens, that's correct. The only way you get immediate relief on the contribution rate and then ultimately potentially interest savings, depending on what happens with other changes to the actuarial valuations, is to give money directly to CalPERS. And that's an area where staff has never contested that. We actually agree, with the speakers that there's a couple ways you can approach your pension liability. One that council adopted and was brought through the Finance Committee was the concept of just shortening the amortization period. That squishes the curve. The only way you drop the curve is by contributing additional lump sum payments. And staff's never contested that point.
May I have a follow-up question? So then if it sounds like there's agreement in the principle of the action. So am I to understand then that where there may not be agreement is how much to put into that action?
And Councilmember Spector said it correctly. The way the conversation originally happened at the Finance Committee, ultimately further conversation about this type of approach was no longer work that staff was going to perform because we were provided direction to move forward with analysis on other ways. One of the things we did was we did the analysis on how to shorten the amortization period, turn it into a policy mandate, but with the realization that that policy mandate, the money that would then be utilized every year for additional payments would move directly to PARS as to any other type of vehicle.
Okay. So then given where we're at, and given that it appears there's agreement and there's one option that could be pursued, this pay down, is when can we revisit that so that we can look at what amount should be used to pay down that amount so that the curve actually goes down?
So last year, after council decided through the budget process that they wanted additional monies put towards the pension obligations, the Finance Committee deliberated that, and the outcome was a couple things. One, we came up with a dollar cost averaging approach to utilize the monies the council had given us authority to put towards unfunded liabilities. The other thing was council adopted a new amortization policy that said every year we want to make sure that even though CalPERS is still going to calculate our retrospective unfunded liabilities on a 30-year amortization, we're going to create it as if it were a 20-year amortization. So this year, as we head into the proposed budget in May, June, at the strategic priorities based on the $3.7 million, council continued to reiterate that paying down unfunded liabilities is, definitely still a primary goal of this council. Of the $3.7 million in the report, based on some of the other priorities council had, you can see that we've identified, this is one option, this is not the final option, of putting $1.4 million towards it. The memo also identified an additional $1 million in compensated absence change in policy that council could consider putting towards other uses. At the end of the budget conversation, we'll know exactly how much money council has decided we want to put towards unfunded liabilities, and then we would move into the Finance Committee and then ultimately the Oversight Committee to say these are some ways that we can put that money to work to do what you asked us to do, which is address unfunded liabilities.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Just want Mr. Andrews, I guess, or whoever knows the answer to this question. It's my recollection, and I'm prepared to be corrected, that the discussion of whether to actually pay a lump sum down to CalPERS or put money in the PARS, and I'm not going to use the nice economic language, though I appreciate it, was discussed at the Finance Committee, and the Finance Committee ultimately decided that they did not recommend that we did a lump sum, So was disagreement among people that are here and people that were on the finance committee. The people that were on the finance committee that did not trust CalPERS and did not want the money to go there prevailed, and the council determined that we would put money into PARS, not a lump sum to CalPERS. Am I mistaken about that?
I would say at a very high level, yes. A lot of, especially our public members on the finance committee, have great skepticism against CalPERS. They're not inclined to provide them with any more resources, and they prefer accumulating resources in the PARS account, once again with the theoretical expectation that if that earns return at the same rate of CalPERS, it would be as if you gave it to CalPERS anyway. The only difference is at some point, whatever the capital accumulation is in this PARS bucket, ultimately the only way to reduce the unfunded obligation is to at some point in time eventually give it to CalPERS.
So is March 5th the appropriate time to determine whether we want to change our approach of putting it at PARS or putting it a lump sum to CalPERS? Is that the appropriate time to discuss this?
We could certainly start addressing it at the finance committee and tell you.
Yeah, I think we were thinking that it's probably an oversight committee discussion since that's the next really great opportunity. And it was really the oversight committee that made the final decision on this. And given that the council now a couple of times has asked to revisit it, I think we're going to be talking about performance of our PARS anyway. So to the extent we can fit it in, I think it might be healthy for the council to kind of look at the data more specifically from Bartell if we think we're going to be ready as early as March 5th.
Sure.
So.
If I may, there was one other nuance. Mr. Andrews was speaking about the money that went into the PARS trust. There is also the option in addition to paying it directly to CalPERS, but there was the option Bartell had spoken about was to be able to take some of the PARS money and we can direct it to the town to use for our pension expense during the future years to arrive at a net contribution rate that is a lower, Bartell used a rate that we would have, a target rate that we would try to maintain, that we could afford. We could use those PARS monies as a supplement to our budget in the future years, and instead of giving the money directly to PERS, that's one other option that Bartell discussed with us as a potential strategy.
Okay, Mr. Rennie?
Thank you. Since we're discussing this now, I have to remind us that part of the reason we didn't want to put the money directly into the PERS, but to put it into PARS is, and I know you can't see this very well, but if you recall, our unfunded liabilities actually have a curve that looks like this. Out at the 10 to 15 year range is when we're going to feel the most pain. If you took $10 million today and put it in there, you would move the curve down. You can see I've got but it moves the curve down next year, so next year we'll be paying less. And it moves it down in 30 years or 25 years, we'll be paying less. What we really want to do is focus where the pain is going to be. So if you keep the money in our PARS account, we can use it anytime we want to pay pension obligations. In this portion of the curve, as Mr. Conway just alluded to, we could use it to supplement our budget. It could keep, it effectively would lower what we'd have to take from our general fund in this middle, most painful part of the and I see him shaking his head, so I think I'm probably correct. So that is what I think is really strategic, is focusing to lower the middle part of where the pain is. And if we keep it in our own fund and we don't give it to PERS until we get into the pain, basically it helps us more. So
I'll just add, the council member brings up a good point. At your last oversight board, you made edits to your investment policy, which included exactly all three scenarios we're talking about. It made sure that the investment policy you have for the monies that you've already put in PARS, you have the ability to do any of these options. And so it did contemplate that this conversation has been happening and that future conversations might say, well, let's do some of this option now in addition to the other options we're doing.
Okay, Councilmember Sayoc?
Okay, I'm getting confused now. So I'm going to look to both of you to help me. I thought by paying down a lump sum, that bell curve, that that highest peak would actually go down, so the pain would be less.
That's correct. That's
okay.
correct.
So
All things, assumptions being, and Arn can correct me if he needs to, but I would agree that would be correct. And I think the danger, of course, that was expressed to the Finance Committee was the reluctance to, because of, as Arn had pointed out, that we're at a high valuation in our stock market right now, and so there is some concern about a large payment given to PERS where losses could be sustained, and so there were critical concerns about that I think led the Finance Committee to think that maybe PARS was a wiser choice. So if you used the PARS money if you didn't make the $10 million lump sum pay down, you would have a higher curve, but that gap, the difference in the curves, we would use PARS money to supplement our annual budget and cover that. Was one strategy Bartel talked about.
And I would just add that all of these have actually been good options. It's not as if one's necessarily better than the other, but I think collectively, all of them do exactly what the council has articulated they want to do, which is address the unfunded liability. To date, PARS can provide budgetary relief, as Councilmember Rennie spoke to. The shortened amortization, I believe the staff memo calculated in conjunction with CalPERS that was going to save somewhere in the vicinity of $8 to $10 million. I can't remember it off the top of my head right now. So just by shortening the amortization period, we know there's interest savings. What paying specific bases does is exactly what you said. It does a parallel shift down in what is the projected costs over a time frame. It does a parallel shift down, and it's also additional interest savings. So I would say to date, everything that's been done is good, and there are a few tools left in the tool chest to address this, and one of them would be lump sum payments directly to CalPERS.
Councilmember Sayoc.
And one more question, and I appreciate the different options available. So we've had PARS for a year or 2 years?
Which exactly be, I believe, our first payment was in March of 2018.
So in the year that we've had it, how has our interest in line with PARS versus CalPERS? I mean, are they tracking the same? Are we doing much better?
So we can address that at the Oversight Committee, but I
Okay.
would say bear in mind that the PARS account has higher equity exposure than the CalPERS account, and so they won't track in an identical fashion.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, since I'm going to go back to the staff recommendation is that we discuss, I will discuss my various concepts, which are not necessarily linear. First of all, I think ideally I would like this concept of PERS or PARS to go back to the Finance Committee. It doesn't sound like it's going to, but for me, a new issue would be the targeted PERS payments, which either was not stated or I didn't get the last time it was at the Finance Committee. So ideally, that's what I would like on that issue. If not, then it can come back on March 5th to the council. But it would be an idea that I would like us to revisit. I certainly do understand those members of the Finance Committee who are not enamored of giving money to PERS. Makes sense. But on the other hand, if targeting money to PERS is more beneficial to the town than the account, then I think that would be a good idea. But right now, I don't know, and that's a lot of what I have here on my notes to myself. Is there are a lot of things I don't know. That's one of them. And also, when we're talking about making payments, I don't know what. Not only, I don't know exactly how much money we have in our internal funds, or if I know how much is in there, how much we have to keep in there, or which ones can be modified. I don't understand at this point what our year-end excess funds are. Again, I understand the concept. I don't know the number. We have been talking about $3.7 million. I don't really know what that $3.7 million is. We talk about excess budgeting, budget salaries, budgeting at the top end, so we'd have money left over. all of these things, if you put them together, they give the council an idea, or more than an idea. They would let the council know how much money do we have to contribute to expenditures like our pensions and others that aren't budgeted for things like salaries or those kinds of items. So there are a lot of things I don't know. When I read the staff report, there was information in it, but it wasn't information that addressed these issues that are important to me.
Councilmember Rennie?
Thank you, Mayor. Let me address Councilmember Sayak's question a little bit more. The curve does come down if we do a lump sum payment, but it comes down in all parts of the curve. So we're paying less money out at 25 years. Well, we could instead pay that money, again, where it's more painful, and pull the curve down, flatten the curve in the middle where it's painful the most. So then let me go to Councilmember Spector's comment. I hate to see us oscillate back and forth between strategies. We the Finance Committee put us on a certain strategy. We agreed to it, and we're moving forward that way. I hate to go look at putting it in PERS instead of PARs. If we did do that, though, and if you started looking at paying off certain of the amortizations, again, I would target where the pain is the most. So to me, that means don't pay off the one that finishes in 6 years because we haven't reached the pain. That doesn't make any sense. That gives us relief in the next 6 years, which is not where we need it the most. I wouldn't pay one off at 30 years because it's giving relief out at 25, 26, right? I would look for ones that are, I think there's a 14 and a 19 because it gives you the most you can give relief in the middle portion of it. Again, it's better to have it in PARs and then use it for a budget supplement to really focus it in where the most pain is. But if we were to think that way, I would encourage us to think the way I just mentioned. If I could ask a question of our original report, it's forecasting we're going to be $1.5 million short under our looks like most likely scenario for next year. I'm surprised nobody's asked the question yet. How are we going to balance our budget next year? If that's truly what we're going to make? How's staff going to balance this budget next year? We're not very far off from planning next year's budget, so we must be already thinking about something.
Thank you, Councilmember Rennie. The report doesn't specifically address that. It does point out that our current estimate was a $1.5 million shortfall in the proposed budget for 1920. However, just in the past week, we've just attended a property tax meeting. County gave us some more recent updated information. Our ERAF payment is coming in stronger than staff had been given prior estimates from the county. So that amount is actually dropping. We'll know more as we get closer to the May, as we start working on the proposed budget. We're refining those numbers constantly, using all the sources we can. So we expect that target's going to be dropping. So we may be in the million, I don't want to tie us to any particular number, but I think the $1.5 million is about in my mind, a worst case scenario. We're working down from that point. When we start getting in the $800,000 or $900,000 range, the town has addressed this in the years I've been finance secretary. That's the 2 to 3% correction that we either through a combination of, as the town manager stated, revenue improvements or some expenditure service level adjustments we make. We've been able to accommodate that as part of our budget team. Looking at all the services we provide, we've been able to. It's never been easy, but it's not something that.
So it's likely we're going to be cutting services next year.
I wouldn't say it's likely, but that would be one possible a solution. You have a limited number of options when you're dealing with a deficit, and we also have the ability because as our new developments, as our fiscal future plan shows, we have future developments that will be coming online. North 40 and other property tax improvements. We're thinking of maybe some possibility of using some bridge type funding of one-time uses where we could find a one-time use in the 1920 budget with some one-time revenues. so that would get us through the hard times until the revenue picture improved a bit. And those are all that's another piece. So it's not necessarily that we have to reduce services. There's a wealth of ideas and solutions that, as a budget team together, we explore, and I'm confident that we will come up with a good solution for 1920.
So one possible solution might be to not do any contributions to our internal service funds, for example.
If we believed, when I believe we'll be taking our internal service fund policy forward to council, and if there is an internal service fund that appears to be more than adequately funded, then that's certainly an option that we could reduce contributions made from the general fund user departments and lower those costs, which would have a lowering, as you mentioned, a lowering of total cost to the general fund. That could be one potential that's out there.
Okay, thank you.
And if I may just add that our goal is always to provide to you a balanced budget. We do not do deficit budgeting here in the town of Los Gatos. So as Director Conway mentioned, there are several budget balancing strategies that we've implemented previously, and we're considering this to be a status quo budget as we start preparing it for 1920, which means essentially we intend to maintain the service levels that we have today, acknowledging the rising costs for the various operations that we have. But you will see a balanced budget in May.
Vice Mayor.
Keeping in mind that we are discussing, I'm looking at the chart that the manager referred us to on page 15 of 17. And so I'm going to discuss. So it's got 1.3 allocated to pension OPEB. I assume if we don't want to change that, that would come forward on March 5th. PCI improvements 1.3. I think that's consistent with the discussions that we had at our priority session. I agree with the town manager. I believed when I voted for it that the $1 million set aside for downtown was infrastructure improvements. I think a million ideas is great, but it's not $1 million kitty for somebody to have an idea and use it. It was intended as an infrastructure fund, at least from my perspective. I'm not going to comment on the chamber summer events, but if we are indeed projecting deficits, when it comes forward in May, I hope that we're going to be discussing, should we be spending $1 million that we think we found this year when we think we're going to need $1 million next year? So those are the kinds of questions that at least I hope that we get information on when it comes back.
Yes, and I think that's, as Director Conway mentioned, sometimes we do use one-time money to create that budget bridge from one year to the next, but we want to make sure that we also have ongoing revenue to cover our ongoing costs. So absolutely, we would look at those options for you.
Mr. Rennie?
Thank you. I'd like to go back to that. When I guess I'm a little concerned, unless these numbers aren't really the numbers, because the second year out, after next year, you now have a $2 million budget. So if we start using up our one-time money, how are we going to, we'll be even further in the hole for the next year. If, I guess I'm questioning if this is really the hole we could be in, why are we waiting so long to cut services?
So I think it's really important to remember that a forecast is not a budget. So this is just a forecast, very high level of our major drivers for revenue and expenditures. It gives us a sense of what those trends are. We do our best to estimate them, and that's why we also do the sensitivity analysis, because if we suddenly go into a recession, or if the Airbnb becomes very successful, we might see upswings or downswings. So,
but you gave us a base case of -1.5 and -2, and then I think -1.8. That's the base case. That's not even taking into account sensitivity analysis.
That's correct. But I think even as a base, it's really pretty much a very thin margin, but it is a forecast. So when we come back with a budget, you're going to have a balanced budget. You're not going. So we will find places to either cut expenditures. Maybe we cut the frequency of tree trimming. We cut the frequency of sidewalk cleanings. We cut something in order to balance the budget. And those are tough decisions. And what we would do is in May, we would outline those trade-offs for you. And you'd say, we really want to do the sidewalk cleanings, and we won't be doing, pothole repair or something else that's, more operational. So there are going to be some choices along the way. This is very conservative, as Director Conway mentioned, and very much subject to change. So this was our snapshot, best estimate today. But, if we need to reduce services, we will. I don't think we're at that point yet, just because of the uncertainties and the opportunities, quite frankly, that the town faces.
I would add, as an information tool, what this information tells you is we don't necessarily have a lot of latitude in ongoing commitments, but the council does have some latitude with one-time monies that have been identified, either from the surplus last year or from the compensated absences that were identified, or as we identified in the analysis of the capital reserve account, there is potentially money there, but all that money is, for the most part, one-time monies. And so as you start to contemplate the types of projects and the types of ways you would like to allocate money heading into this budget cycle, putting $1 million aside for a reserve for downtown infrastructure revitalization, that's a one-time commitment that coincides with what we're seeing in this initial forecast. Thinking that you were going to do something that was an ongoing commitment, this kind of says caution. You don't necessarily want to be committing to a lot of ongoing commitments right now. And so as a tool, I think it's telling you you've got some latitude with one-time money. You probably don't have a lot of latitude with ongoing commitments.
All right. Any more comments or discussion on this item? It's informational only. Seeing none, I think we know what to do from here. We'll move on to item 7, which was pulled from our agenda. So who do we have, Mr. Conway?
Good evening, Mayor Leonardis, Town Council. Tonight, you have before you the town's fiscal year 18-19 mid-year budget performance report. Staff is pleased to report that the revenue expenditures for the year are trending positively compared to our adopted budget estimates. Staff's recommending a general fund revenue budget adjustment increase, total net increase of around $999,000. There's also an accompanying expenditure budget adjustment, a smaller expenditure adjustment increase of a net of $80,000 approximately. The current staff estimates, which are continuing, as I mentioned, to be refined as we approach the May 2019 target for introducing the proposed fiscal year 19-20 operating capital budget, indicate a current year, fiscal year 18-19 general fund surplus for the year of approximately $430,000. That's, I believe, on page 12 of the mid-year report. Our final actual audited revenue and expenditures for fiscal year 18-19 are typically available for town council in mid-November to early December 2019. Those will be our final audited numbers for 18-19, where this estimate of $430,000 will be confirmed one way or the other. Staff's available for any follow-up questions you may have on the mid-year report.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions for staff at this time? Seeing none, we'll open up the public hearing. Jack Von Naeda, first speaker.
Thank you. This may be a question couched in a statement, or vice versa, a statement couched in a question. When I look at the budget and I look at salaries and benefits, maybe the first 2 years will be scheduled, but then we'll see zeros out there in changes. And that the reason given for that is because the contract hasn't been negotiated, and you don't want to send a signal to the union as to what those raises may be. The problem I have with that is this is the CalPERS actuarial valuation right here. And the unions have this. And if you look at the highlighted line down here, it's got the projected payroll, and I've got to think that CalPERS is getting that projected payroll from the town. So it seems senseless to give council a budget with zeros out there in those 3 years when the union's pretty sophisticated and they can pull this report and they can see these same wages. So I don't understand is what I'm saying. Why do we put those zeros out there when this is public knowledge?
Thank you. Next speaker, Philip Coe and
It's the dial right there. How do I do that? You spin it. It's starting to increase. And then stop because it'll keep going past what you do.
It's late. I know you're tired. So I'll try to make this real short and to the point. I was amazed, quite frankly, that this was on the consent calendar. So I looked at this schedule, and I'm just curious if everyone on the council is comfortable with the fact that what this is telling me is that your departmental expenses are going to grow 5.3 million this year from last year, actual to actual. Headline, 5.3 million increase. Were you aware of this? Here's the amazing thing. Of that departmental expenditures, 75% of it's salary and benefits. The rest of it is like operating expenses. So to ease everyone's mind, I'm actually here a bearer of good news, and hopefully you will agree with me. In actuality, these forecasts aren't going to happen. You are actually going to have about a $2 million surplus this year. Now, how do I know that? Because halfway through the year, salaries and benefits are, everything is about 17.5 million. You double that, 35 million. There's no way you're going to pass the HIF 37 million unless you're hiring a bunch of people, you're giving a lot more raises. It's not going to happen. Here's my point. We don't look at the historical spend rate and budget from there. So it's not as dire as you think. You're not coming into next year and going to start hitting these budget deficits. Because unless you believe, and tell me now, these are my numbers, these are the town's numbers, are we going to spend 5.3 million this year more in departmental expenses? What are we getting for that? Cleaner streets, more tree cutting? Explain it to me. Because these are your numbers. I don't believe it. I don't think anyone on this council believes it, because if you did, you would not have just passed this on a consent calendar. No way. Not possible. I can't imagine this group just sitting there saying, yep, we're going to spend 5.3 million and not having a clue as to whether or not that's true or not. So, good news. You actually aren't on the trajectory that this is telling you. Last point, the last column here is your entry point in the 5-year plan. So if you just look at the first year of the 5-year plan, it's the stepping off point for 18. You're going to be 2 million better.
All right. Thank you. That closes the public testimony on that. Does council have any questions for staff or a motion on item number 7?
If I might just comment on the comment about the actuarial valuation from CalPERS. For actuarial valuations, they put in an escalator for payroll. They do it to try and figure out ultimately what the unfunded liability is. And then I believe CalPERS does it, it's either every 3 or every 5 years, they do what's referred to as an experience study. And they go back and look at the variables that they assumed versus the reality of what happened. But that's a CalPERS dictated actuarial variable where they say we need some type of escalator for payroll because payrolls generally tend to have the ability to move up over time as opposed to down. However, during the recession, that wasn't true, and that changed valuations pretty dramatically. But that's where that comes from. At some point, CalPERS will look at what they assumed versus the reality of what happened in the town, and they'll make adjustments, and those will show up as either negatives or positives towards the town's unfunded liability.
Thank you. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Since it's out there, does staff have any response to the testimony that about the $5 million, that it's being better than we thought it was and we shouldn't worry? So is somebody going to address that?
Our staff, our estimates for fiscal year 18-19 do include an anticipation that we'll be spending at levels that approximate, 90 to 97, 98% of our departmental budgets. In some cases, those departmental budgets come in lower than that. Just our town is really great at finding ways to do a great job at a less cost. So we're always pleasantly surprised by our staff in terms of department-wide. So we do experience savings in that regard, but staff can't count on that. The other thing that council is aware that we do budget and we have some savings that we might expect from our vacancy factor that may come into play. We do have some vacant positions right now, and so we expect those dollars will be available. We make some assumptions about that. We do our best to try to predict where we'll end up. I will stress also that I would not make any guarantees about a $2 million. We have averaged in the $1 to $2 million year-end savings since I've been director here. And I must remind council, and I know council's well aware of this, this is the money that we put, if you go back to our flow chart that we had tonight in our financial forecast, that's the money that flows into our capital improvement reserve, and that is our well where we go for all of our infrastructure work, which has, for the most part, no dedicated funding source. So some of the savings that we do anticipate in the budget automatically flow to our capital program, and that's an intentional strategy that the town has had long before Mr. Conway was finance director, but that's been a strategy the town has used to have the discipline to set those savings aside for infrastructure, and otherwise we'd have a very small capital program.
Thank you for your explanation. Is there any further comments? Mr. Rennie.
I'll make a motion that we accept the 2018-19 mid-year budget performance report, and we authorize the budget adjustments as recommended in the budget performance report.
Second.
Motion and a second. I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. It passes unanimously. Thank you. So moving on to council matters. We'll start with Councilmember Sayoc.
Okay, since our last public hearing, there was a Cities Association meeting as well as a League of Cities Peninsula Division meeting. The subject of both were the CASA Compact and the bills that are moving forward in the legislature. There is a draft letter that the Cities Association is putting together that we will ask to be sent to all city managers to be shared with council, so that it provides at least talking points that as a whole the Santa Clara County cities would like to share with one another, so that if one chooses to engage in any advocacy, there are talking points that have been agreed upon by the Cities Association.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Since the last council meeting, the West Valley Clean Water Authority met. That's pretty much a new organization, and so they introduced us to the staff, informed us of the organization's objectives and also its priorities for the coming year. The Solid Waste Management Group met, and it identified its priorities for the coming year. And then I participated with other town representatives in a Retail Outlook webinar.
All right, thank you. Since our last meeting, I attended the Treatment Plant Advisory Committee meeting in San Jose, and I attended the West Valley Sanitation District Board of Directors meeting, and I also attended the webinar. Vice Mayor.
I have nothing to report.
Councilmember Rennie.
Thank you. I also attended the webinar. In addition, LAFCO met on the 6th, and the VTA board met on the 7th. I attended those. I also attended the service provider quarterly meeting that they have at the chamber, and Mr. Andrews was there also. And today, the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Risk Oversight Committee met. That's it.
Thank you. Manager matters.
Thank you. Just 2 announcements. We are currently recruiting for our adult commissions. Applications are due on April 5th. And we're also recruiting for our youth commission. Applications are due May 3rd. On Saturday, February 23 at 2 p.m., we have an author event. Anna Yen will be here to talk about her book called Sophia of Silicon Valley. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you for everybody for your participation this evening.